Game begin.
Hello and welcome to episode 32 of the Spike Colony podcast. I am here with the still never mulliganing, even though he just had an Ancestral Recall podcast episode where he said the strategy is to mulligan aggressively to the thing that you have to beat the matchup. Doesn't take his own advice, Michael J. Flores.
I believe I said I was fearless at mulliganing.
You were formerly fearless at mulliganing. Now you only live in fear of your 6-card hands. You're just like, this one's got lands and spells. What if my 6-card hand has no lands or spells?
Lanny, I mulliganed to 5 in the top 4 and then never flashed back my deduce. So, I say I never mulligan, but I actually think I mulligan an appropriate amount of the time.
We finally got there. Be sure to check out the Ancestral Recall podcast. I thought that this was going to be a slow week in Premodern. I thought for the first time on this podcast, I'd introduce it by saying
nothing to say.
Slow week in the Premodern. So let's go talk about theory. But instead, fire in the Facebook group. We can talk about agency. We can talk about Tsabo's web. We should probably
let's start with the Anton thing. I'd actually just rather start with
and of course we want to try to unpack. This is going to take the whole podcast. Try to unpack.
We can put in 3 hours.
Try to unpack a little about. I don't know where this is going to go.
Oh yeah.
Try to unpack a little. For those getting up to speed. Mike made what I think was a very flippant comment about other people when they play Burn. I think that people like Anton Gland, somebody who we respect in the community, took this to represent a very contemptuous attitude that Mike may have towards other players. I would be inclined to agree that if you say a sentence like "burn players are so bad," that might reflect your attitude. And I also think personally, and I told Mike this, that you were so close to making a very important and interesting point. The analogy you made was that if we leave out the part where you are so bad. The analogy you made was like you can be headed for Vancouver and end up in London, and that a small change in heading can greatly change your destination, which I think is very insightful. Which means that it's very easy to make mistakes, mistakes that influence outcomes,
especially early on.
Yeah,
in the game. So let me just say, when Anton replied or whatever, I actually wrote how many different versions of responses did I workshop with you and then later with the whole Illuminati?
So part of the problem,
a book full.
Part of the problem was the responses were too long and they did not resemble what I thought would be an apt apology for the thing that you're being criticized for.
I didn't want to apologize. I did want to address things, but I don't think I did anything. I'm going to put this in quotes is wrong. However, 2 things came out of this. One, I think I appreciate the thing you said, which is if I just said the heading thing first, right? And it probably sounds contemptuous. This doesn't mean anything, right? For me to say I don't actually feel contemptuous towards everybody, but I was just, my whole brand is making ridiculous points that are very, very extreme in order to illustrate a point. Yeah. Right.
I actually love this because to me, there's kind of like a pecking order because I met John Finkel for the first time, as we discussed, I guess last week. And, John was just like, Mike just has these takes that are just so bad and he's so bad at Magic. And I was just like, this is where Mike learned the bullying from, because he too was bullied by the greatest Magic player of all time.
And I started testing with John Finkel when he was 16 years old. And John Finkel would tell you that I had a very positive impact on his,
I'll be sure to ask him that. You would have been 19.
No, I mean, even
different generations
in the last few years. I could send you the text he sent me. It's just please don't mention this thing that you gave me. You'll get full credit in 2 days. Right?
You wrote about that in one of the articles. My point is, I want to be clear in what I'm trying to get across, which is that I think at least now you should be aware that I'm gonna give two sizes. One of this is just that I'm very self-aware when I say something sounds like a bad decision. I mean, obviously we exaggerate sometimes. We're just like, oh, it's idiotic.
But for emphasis,
to play Volcanic Hammer in your burn deck, it's so stupid. I see people doing it all the time.
I think Volcanic Hammer is okay. I like that card.
Flame Rift.
Flame Rift, no. Volcanic Hammer, I think is okay.
Phyrexian Furnace, even. Shout out to Chris DiBiase.
Actually, but pause for a second. Pause for 1 second on shout out to Chris DiBiase. I actually really want to make a point of this thing, which is before we deleted like at least an hour's worth of podcast that is not fit for public consumption. A lot of our actual close friends were mentioned in ways that are like too intimate for public consumption. But the thing I want to say about Chris DiBiase is I often will watch Chris DiBiase tape or like coverage and just be like, and then also like
Iron Lungs Online,
Iron Lungs Online, and then just like, I'm like, oh well, I would have played these plays differently. I think if he'd made any of these three plays differently, he would have won this match, etc. However, you said your operating idea to me. You said like people all think that they're right and like have a good faith believe that they're right. And even people who you diametrically disagree with think that they're the hero of the story and like you're competing in some way, but they do believe that they're right. Right. I have a different fundamental belief in other people. Right. And my belief in other people is everybody is better than me, but they're not better than me at everything. Right. But everybody's better than me at something. That's actually my belief in that.
Yeah,
like,
and Chris is better than you at rhetoric.
Definitely better than me at editing a Magic article, right? I mean, like, mind-blowingly better, right? So, but I really try to like approach this in a way where it's like every single person is better than me at something, and that I therefore have something learned from them. And like, I mean, just as an example, like this is the most extreme example, right? Like somebody once challenged me. They're like, what about a mentally handicapped person? They're also like not in good shape. I'm like, if I could approach the world with that person's openness and their like ability to see the good in every situation, I would be so much happier, right? Like that was like so fast, but everybody's better. Anton is a level at CrossFit better than I am. That like I can't like he appears to be better than Flint as far as I can tell.
Well, Flint fell off the wagon.
Yeah,
Mike, we're getting a little distracted. I think it's very noble of you. I think it's very noble.
I'm just saying that's actually just my
I think it's very noble. I think
conscious position.
I think you need to. I think the thing that I'm trying to get across here is that. So one thing is, I think this is actually kind of interesting because I'm kind of like the good, the rational guy, and you're kind of like the crazy guy on this podcast. Like you just like you like to go off, and then like
always believe myself to be a rational, mathematically based tuner.
Yeah, and you're just like you're not even close in the eyes of the public.
Collaborators, John, Osip, and Chapin have all said the same thing. Like, you are nothing close to that.
I receive scores of messages about how they're like, oh man, I love how this podcast has the structure where like Mike just goes off on this like completely insane hot take and you just like bring him back to earth. Like you guys are so fun, entertaining. So like we have this like kind of thing. And when it came to this thing happening, it's basically you got called. I mean, I'm gonna reduce this down to what it is, which is that you were called out for what people perceive to be toxic behavior. And I'm of course like related to this because I created this, like I'm really annoyed. People are like, oh, Spike Colony's Mike's platform. I'm like, Spike Colony is Lanny's platform. Mike is allowed onto Spike Colony. And sometimes
I have plenty of platforms.
Sometimes Mike gets to choose the guest for the platform when Lanny's in Australia, but this is my platform. And because it's my platform, I think people have this view, which is like, I'm implicit in this, right? Because like if you're saying stuff vitriol, like
is the word you're looking for.
Complicit, sorry. Okay, relax. I'm complicit in this by having created this platform, published the podcast, and let you say vitriolic, whatever toxic stuff on the thing. So it reflects on me.
So you're starting from a baseline that I say vitriolic, toxic things.
I'm doing what I've told you, which is like people think this about you,
sure,
right? And it's not up to me to decide whether or not I'm being vitriolic. It is up to the person who feels like vitriol is being directed towards them. And the best thing that we can do is just, try to correct for this So, I've been trying my best to like make the comments because like we're friends. I know you. I know what you're like. I know that you. I mentioned this earlier. I feel like you don't adjust the kinds of things that you say based on the context, right? So one thing that you told me was like, oh, I just think I'm bad at forums. I'm like, yeah, of course you're bad at forums because you're not changing how you speak on forums based on like what the forum is. Like if the forum includes like a very large strata of competitive or non-competitive pre-modern players or people who like you've never met, right? Or people who like playing Flame Rift and Burn. It's just like you need to show some generosity to the people and show some consideration for them and like not say that they're bad. The fact of the matter is it might not even be true, right? So one of the things that I think should rub people the wrong way is just like you haven't played the matchup in question. This is why I stopped you before you kept on talking. I was like, you haven't played the matchup in question. What if you're wrong? Like you're like, what if
the other side will get my $100?
Yeah. What if
that's what will happen? But
yeah, but what if
the beauty of putting the $100 down? I'm wrong and I get punished.
Yeah. So I'm good and I'm good with it.
That's an appropriate outcome.
Another thing that you mentioned was like you're like, oh, this is part of my brand. Like part of my brand is like I'm putting hyperbolic. Obviously you don't think
I don't use the word hyperbolic.
I know you don't use the word hyperbolic, but like people would agree with me.
Dream but hyperbolic indicates that things are not like they're
that you're doing it intentionally. Like you're intentionally exaggerating.
It's not really true.
Yeah.
But the thing is, like, I say an exaggerated example, but like look at the examples I use in agency. The examples I use are like a Lost in the Woods deck. Like a deck that has
let's be clear that
non-sorcery speed effects.
Oh yeah, Mike, let's reel this back in. Nobody's taking issue. Right? Nobody takes issue with you reasoning by extremes, which is the Lost in the Woods deck. The issue is having, like I said, like I understand why people might take issue with we're science-natured people. We're men of science, men of math. We care about the objective truth. And then also sometimes we're just like, there's no way you could ever play Swords to Plowshares in the main deck of Grotog. Your meddling mage is always named Swords to Plowshares. The value's so important. And then
Lanny, we worship at the foot of the dealer and believe that plot armor is the reason people win tournaments. We are men of faith. I hate to break it to you.
Well, yeah. So there's that. But no. We'll say things that aren't that don't come with. We'll say things that have a lot of hubris. We'll say things that don't have like the measured amount of humility, right? So you're like, oh, burn players always misplaying into Circle of Protection Red. You don't need your Anarchy or your Flaring Pains. Just play correctly into Circle of Protection Red. You'll never lose the matchup.
I've never said you never lose the matchup. I said it's a waste of sideboard space.
I understand. And that's the amount of measure. And sometimes people only hear the most extreme of it, and that's something that we can't control. So there's almost too much to unpack here, but I just want to make it clear that like the fact that people got the impression that that we have a negative attitude or we want to push out novices and beginners. Like Anton recently pointed out that he thought that maybe we were creating an environment that was hostile or unwelcoming to people learning the format or learning certain decks. And that's tough because I feel like I don't personally agree that that's true, and I would need to like I can maybe connect the dots and just be like, yes, like if I'm out on my podcast and I'm saying some card is bad for some deck, like that might feel very exclusionary towards somebody who, that's the first card they think of when they're building the deck and they really love that card. Like Browbeat's like a great example, right? It's like people really are always just like, let's play Browbeat. And it's just like, yeah, I understand that if like you hop in or you're like listening to our podcast or you're in a forum and you're just like, hey, what do you guys think about Browbeat and Burn? And we're just like, it sucks. And then I understand how that can be hostile, but I also, we believe what we believe, and we think that we're correct too. And so
I think we're correct at the point that we're saying the thing, but
yeah, we're saying the thing. We're using our platform, whatever.
I mean, like, just look at you. How many matches did you play of Mono Blue Dreadnought this week?
6.
It's coincidentally that's how many league runs, right? Yeah. So like you're like we've long held the position that you shouldn't play Mono Blue Dreadnought.
Well,
and
I wanted
both of us
to
have considered playing it recently.
Well, I wanted to give it a little, like, I wanted to see if the feel was different. I had a thesis that Mono Blue Dreadnought plays up to 4, possibly 6 more cantrips than Blue White Dreadnought does, and if you play 6 more cantrips with fewer lands, that could change the texture of the deck and give it some advantages in places, because a lot of people just argued that the deck was like, oh, you cast your Gushes and Foils and Dazes all the time. And I was just like, these are like 3 cards that are like relatively situational, and like navigating around, like it's actually very rare that you're forced to cast these cards when you don't want to. And it's also very rare that the blue-white player can't like navigate to a position to cast those cards. I thought that this argument was very thin, but I thought a great argument for, like, if somebody just played and said, we're like arguing about blue white versus mono blue, it's just like, I would have just been like, mono blue has 3 fewer lands. That's awesome. Like, that's just what I said. It's like the deck has fewer lands. It's like 2 things.
One, well, that's awesome. The other thing is, like, I considered playing mono blue in the Bottlenums tournament because I had literally lost to Wasteland out of Bill's deck. The 2 games that he beat me, we went to 3. In the previous meetup, he beat me with Wasteland on Adakar Waste, and like, if I couldn't have been Wastelanded, I would have won, right? Like, and like that was, I was just like, well, if I can't be Wastelanded, this seems very powerful.
Yeah, and Meddling Mage is really bad against. Well, and I was tends to be bad against the Oath decks.
I was going to play Tsabo's Web either way, and I think to your point, Mono Blue has more cantrips, fewer land. There's just more room for Tsabo's Web. I would have had to compromise less because the average card.
There's more room for Tsabo's Web, and you can play fewer copies because you play more cantrips. You play fewer copies. Anyways,
let's play 4 copies of Tsabo's Web, Lanny.
I want to
no other number than 4.
I want to try to close the loop on the stuff that you're being called out for. I think that I personally don't have an issue with your spicy hot take personality, the fact that you feel drawn to
provide a forum
to make to make comments that feel exaggerated and hyperbolic. I think that you should use a little bit more tact when talking about certain things, and I think that's divorced from, like, that's one thing, and then the other thing is just like, we are the Spike Colony podcast, and we are here to be spikes, and I think we set the expectation there in all the spaces. So in Premodern for Non-Idiots and in Spike Colony, I think people have an understanding that, like, the kind of feedback that they're going to get at times might be, and I try to regulate this, but at times might be very passionate and also very directed towards the most competitive possible approach. And then the third thing, you said something which we've discussed previously on Spike Colony, which is like, this is my brand. And I think that, we talked about it. I think that people, from their public figures recently, people want like more authenticity and humility. And there's like a little bit less, I mean, some people still feel this, but there's a little bit like less excitement towards characters because it feels disingenuous. It feels disingenuous to self.
So I don't know, would I have become a popular Magic writer? So when I was starting out, like, it wasn't really starting out. I'd already written written articles like Who's the Beatdown, and I'd been the editor of the dojo. But around 2003, when I came back to Star City and was writing for the Mothership, like the character that eventually became like the Mike Flores character, like writing was like kind of mutually created by Aaron Forsyth and Teddy Knutson, who were respectively editors of MagicTheGathering.com, the Mothership, and at Star City at the time. And they're like, we just need you to say things and never back down. Both of them were just kind of like, we will make more money. That was actually, we will make more money.
They created a monster.
No. They created a character. But it was a very like
monstrous character.
So obviously this character has traits that are similar to me, right? But like you know me in real life. Like I'm not the same as that person. I hope.
Well, I think that's the struggle for somebody like me, being somebody that's close to you and really wants, like if I were to create the character of Michael J, I would be trying to create only the good parts and none of the saying people are bad or idiots. Because I think that you as a person are strangely gentle for a man of your age and just like very sweet. Like you're like a really sweet like guy who's just like really like, I mean, our friendship happened really fast, and like you showed a level of like care and like attention to like my life and how things were going with me, and just like, you know, like you just like had my back as a friend, like in a way that was very unexpected for me, because one, I don't have a lot of male friendships, but I don't expect that out of my male friends. So it caught me by surprise. The only problem is like, you know, sometimes you just say some completely insane stuff and then it just like makes it all like, man, I've got this weird dude who's just like very sweet and also just pops off on stuff sometimes, like, and well, John can confirm.
I am still like a senior citizen screaming at clouds.
Yeah,
I mean,
you like are. Yeah, you certainly are. Yeah.
Our brains calcify as time goes by. You can't. You know, Father Time.
Well, it sounds like Lan, myself, and Bella are all just like are ruthlessly hammering away at the calcification. I think like Lan and Bella are like on a team where they think I'm a little like so. Like Lan and Bella, I think mutually. I only know this because I've seen their text message threads about me. Right? Wow.
But yeah,
violation of trust. But okay.
I mean, they were shared with me by one or more of the parties. That's how I know, right? Fair. Which is kind of like I am a little old-fashioned about some things, right? And but like
capitalism being chief among them.
I think that capitalism.
That's bait. That's bait.
Right? Like
we'll move on.
I mean, just like even.
I don't want to talk about. That's a whole nother podcast.
Anyway, it doesn't matter. Like I've always fought with John about this because we are beneficiaries of capitalism, and John's so anti-capitalist, and I don't know anybody who's.
They sell Noam Chomsky books in Barnes and Noble.
Yeah, well, anyway,
per Tom Morello, that was just like a viral TikTok clip recently. Go ahead.
So, but you know, I appreciate the positive sort of Michael J. love fest.
I mean, you're like a sweet guy, and people think that you're just like rolling up to the LGS and just be like, Flame Rift. Tear it up in front of their face. You're like Seto Kaiba. You're just like, say goodbye to your blue eyes, and you're just like, I don't know if people understand how much I love just going to any random pre-modern meetup. Like I go to like 3 other people are at this meetup. Like I will travel across boroughs to go to like a 3-person meetup. And yeah,
like,
you probably have a higher opinion of Pit Rack than I do.
Yeah, like it's just like rando just play with like anybody and like whatever they want to try, and like I just love playing, and but
it just doesn't come across. It doesn't come across
to anybody for me to. That's not content that is usefully consumable by anyone.
Well, it's just not what we want to.
I like doing a thing that is non-productive.
Well, like I think the issue is that I think that might just get lost, and that might not come across. Like first of all, we're not giving up our 1Ks. Okay, like the people out there who are mad that we have 1Ks is just like, relax, okay? You don't have to come play in the 1K. The people who don't want to play in the 1K don't want to play. Like, I can play a day of Magic, and if I tell my wife that I got $300 at the end of it, she'll let me do it more, okay? So I need the 1Ks, or else I don't get to play Magic, okay? That might not be the case for you. You might have very understanding wives and partners, but mine isn't very understanding. So it helps. It helps if I just like
person.
It helps if I love my wife, obviously. But you know, it's a Saturday, and like that's when we play Magics. People also don't understand that like so in a lot of other suburbs, in the suburb where I came from, like a suburb of San Diego, you could just like roll up to the game shop and like spend no money and just like sit down and play Magic or play tabletop games you'd have to rent, but like you just like play Magic with your friends, or you meet up, or you hang out, or maybe you just like have a juice, or you look at singles, or you play chess, like whatever. Like in New York City, you have to pay to sit because the rent is so like crazy. And like the stores make really low margins. The rent is super high. And like, if you want to have an event where you and 30 plus people are gathered, like, yeah, the brewery is great, but it's also not always easy to find a brewery that's game to have like a bunch of people and like whatever. So like stores have to have a rake from these tournaments, and shout out to Bearded Dragon. Bearded Dragon's been super generous where, you know, they pay back a huge percentage of
the rake,
the rake back in store credit. Or if we're short, like if we have like, you know, 24 people instead of 32, they'll just be like, oh, it's fine. Like, we'll just put up the 1K store credit. They're super chill about it. And like, you know, yeah, we're like, we're not going to stop being a competitive podcast. We're not going to stop having 1Ks. And like, I guess it should just be made clear that this isn't like our vision for what we want the pre-modern community at large to be with is not meant to be exclusionary towards people who want to experiment with something, people who don't care about optimization, right? But optimization just gives us a North Star. Like when Mike and I have a discussion, if it's agreed upon, if we have a discussion in our group, if we have a discussion on the Discord, if all the members of the discussion agree upon the idea that optimal play and optimal deck building is the goal, it gives us something to judge who's making better points on or good arguments, or just like, it just guides us, right? And like, it's not meant to be like, oh, if your goal is not optimization, like you can't sit with us. It's just like, obviously you can. It's just like right now the discussion is about like, yeah, like Flame Rift looks good, but you know, it ends up not being good. And ironically enough, I play basically Flame Rift in my burn deck in the form of Sulfuric Vortex. Like these things have nuance, obviously, but like, you know, and we can be wrong. We can be super wrong. Like I told so many people, you can't play Swords of Plowshares in your main deck Grotog, and then I just like went and played 3 in a weekend.
Because you were optimizing against Michael J though.
Well,
right? Like,
no, because there was things I was wrong about that I needed to correct. Now I don't know if it would have been the same in different metas. Like there's decks that don't play creatures, like Landstill, Parfait, and Replenish or decks that Swords of Plowshares has no text. And if you have a card with no text in your Xerox deck, then you're basically putting a bunch of stops in. So I had my reasons, right? And I reflected and I changed my opinion, and like we can be wrong, and we can be embarrassingly wrong.
Against Landstill.
Yeah, well, yeah. Anyways, we can be embarrassingly wrong. Like when Mike gets embarrassed in this money match against Red Green Oath. But like the basis for this podcast, for the platforms that we do speak on, and when we speak, I think I make it really clear. I'm just like, hey, if optimization is the goal, I think you should do X. Like that's where we're going to be. Like, you know, I don't feel the need to apologize for that because I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I do want to make sure that people don't feel excluded or feel like there's any toxicity in their direction. And you know, look, I'm still like, I think both of us, you know, are open to feedback in ways like, you know, one thing is like, I love cancel culture. I love getting called out. Sam Black calls me out all the time now. I love it. Like if you,
do you feel, do you feel called out by the stuff he says in Non-Idiots? I feel like it's super constructive.
No, I don't think it's like, I'm
glad he says it. That's why I wrote the agency
to be clear, I think that calling out is a constructive behavior. Sometimes it's not, it doesn't come with the best intent, but in general, like being challenged is important. And like, that's what calling out is. And so like, yeah, Mike, I think that you needed to be challenged on your choice of words, because like I said, you were so close to making a point that was really, really solid. And then you just kind of ruined it with one word.
Everyone could just delete the first one, and then they could just read the second one. And then that can be the sentiment. But like I said, you know, we've probably spent an hour on this point already. I appreciate the well-wishing. Lanny says that there was like a 200 message thread that I never read because I just didn't go into it. And also, thanks to everybody who was supportive of me in that thread. But what I decided personally to do, because I couldn't even get whatever response I wanted to get out right, was just to not engage in public forums. And if you want to talk to me in a public forum, I have Non-Idiots. And because I just don't think maybe this, I don't mean this to be a cop-out. I don't currently have the bandwidth to appropriate skills necessary to do a good job.
I actually agree with that. I think that the nature of some of your responses were like a little too focused on you know, being like defensive. And look, I'm here to you know, look inside your soul and press you to look inside your soul. So, you know, look, if you got a problem with Michael J, just know that me, Bella, and Lan are all working on it. And, you know, the calcification is just going to melt away eventually.
On the point of you and Lan having one mind, though, I can say like the optimization kind of standpoint in Premodern I get from you, right? So I used to think you could play like a blue-green oath, blue-green oath thawing glaciers spike weaver deck. That was
you wrote an article about it.
I did, and in fact that
the article got Sam Black into Premodern.
It got Sam Black into Premodern, right? But I used to think that, right? And it was in preparation for LobsterCon of last year when we started testing seriously. You're just like, you're this, or this, or you're on the donkey train, right? And I didn't believe you, and I have forced you to play against any number of horrible fucking brews like over the course of time.
Yeah, for what it's worth, the spike gear between the two of us turns out to be me.
The thing that is hilarious to me is that deck that Fran posted yesterday is just the deck that I was testing against.
Yeah, pretty much.
It's like the same shitty deck, and I'm like, no, Lanny, I can get there. Francis is like, oh, the deck didn't get there. Ryan's like, this is literally.
I don't think you had Eternal Dragon though.
I did. That was my draw engine.
No, your draw engine was Intuition AK, and
I also had Eternal Dragon
and Factor Fiction for Blessing.
Dude, I had
it all.
Dragon. I'm sure I had Eternal Dragon because I had like 10 planes, and I'm like, why doesn't everybody do this? This is so much better than whatever thing. It's not actually better than. Anyway, so that was hilarious because it's just literally just the shitty deck that I made you test against. We were at Sip and Play, I think. That night. So, there's that, and then
time is a flat circle. Yeah,
I got derailed, but it made me happy that Fran just made the same shitty deck. But it was that. But Lan other.
Oh, dude, you should just watch because Fran's just gonna make it great, and then it's gonna be funny. Like, go ahead.
I would be happy for Fran. The thing that
he's just gonna like 10-0 with it.
About like code switching or whatever. It's just like, of all the people in the community who could take the things that I say badly, it's Fran. He never takes it badly, right? He's just like, all right, well,
dude, it just makes him work harder. It makes him win harder.
Like, do you think I'm not cheering for Fran? He's my favorite. Like, he's literally my favorite. I just don't think certain things. I just don't agree with certain underlying things. But I also didn't think blue-white was better than mono-blue until I was wrong, right? So
yeah. You didn't think red-green was the best deck in the format until you were wrong.
Red-green is largely a beneficiary of people thinking that it's not one of the tier 1 decks. Once people start dealing with it like a tier 1 deck, it's just not going to be as... It's going to be good. I'm probably going to play it at Bearded, honestly. But like, it's just not going to be unbeatable.
Oh, you're going to have to give me my Tsabo's Webs back if you're going to play it.
All right, fine then. What I really want to play is... I think Tom's Devourer deck is probably the best deck in the format right now. But I think that's just happenstance because like the fact that it's probably the most natural deck to exploit Tsabo's Web. Just exploit Tsabo's Web without actually making room for Tsabo's Web. Right? Like I stick Tsabo's Web in 12-12. You play Tsabo's Web in a blue-white deck or something. Like, you had to make room for that. Tom's deck is just like, nah, we just got Web and it sets up our kill. Right? And
Tom's deck gets to play Web main deck for free. It's like awesome. Like Devourer wants to tinker away a thing that's card disadvantage. You tinker away at, effectively a Wall of Blossoms. What was Lan H saying?
Oh,
Lan H says, one mind.
Yeah, one land, one mind is LobsterCon 2022 is the last time some idiot could roll up with a replenish deck that he made the night before and expect to be able to do well in Premodern. He says that's like that sentence he says to me all the time. He's just like, get this. There was a white weenie deck with Future Sight in the top 8. Like this.
Nice.
Because like me and BK are
Needle BK, Needle Mike, yeah.
But we're like all of us have been friends for like 30 years.
Listen,
right?
If people take the things that we say at face value, there was like a blue-white Dreadnought deck with Enlightened Tutor in the top 8. There was a blue-red Dreadnought deck in the top 8. And there was a blue-white Dreadnought with, get this, 4 copies of Impulse main deck that made it to the finals. So, anything can happen. LobsterCon 2024, here we come.
Yeah, it's going to be mono devourers.
It's just going to be a Devourer against red-green. Devourer against red-green against like whatever.
Well, you know what the thing that I love about Tom's deck is that if you ask me what the fault point of Devourer is, it's just not the fastest combo deck. Like, so for a deck that's just like, all right, I'm just going to go full speed ahead at
Is turn 3 not fast enough for you, Mike?
The reason I think this is because I saw Osip beat you on a turn faster.
Here we go.
But the presence of Tsabo's Web fucks up Fluctuator. That is it is.
Oh my god! Can you imagine?
It's
Osip keeps a hand that wins on turn 2, and then
sorry, bro. Boom! Nice deck.
Oh man.
Yeah, that's why I mean, it just comes together in such a harmonious way. But like, LobsterCon's far enough away that there's probably going to be like 2 or 3 metanoic shifts in the pre-modern
at this
landscape
rate,
between now and then, given how everything's going. So, but that's awesome to me, because LobsterCon 2022 was the last time some idiot could roll up with a replenish deck he made the night before and expect to do well.
I mean, look, anything can happen in 2024 pre-modern. Who knows? Maybe after this year's nationals runs, Berlin makes some changes to the format, and things keep on turning.
Okay. All right. So that was a super non-spiky talk. What should we talk about next? There's like 3 things we want to talk about.
We want to talk about agency. We want to talk about.
No, I want to talk about Tsabo's web.
Tsabo's web, yeah.
And then we can talk about.
Oh yeah. Okay. So I have I need to just clarify I've said a lot on this podcast about Tsabo's web, and honestly, it's not even appropriate to talk about for us to a certain extent, because we haven't got a chance to just play Tsabo's web against red green oath. Like, we know it's insane versus green white, and
because you stupidly beat me in the top 4. I would have taken down that 1K for the Spike Colony if it was me and Bill in the finals.
So we know that it's a good card. Fran's always just been like, it's a good card. Fran actually said it was a good card because, like, oh man, like, somebody played Tsabo's web against me and that wrecks my deck. But I have a few points. One is like, okay, if your deck is green white, you can play Rare Revelation, and Rare Revelation hurts the green red oath deck at the same time of causing splash damage on some other decks that are pretty good. Considerations like against Enchantress and whatever Riche is playing. It happens to be Enchantress, but like if it's a Parfait build or like over index on Oath or Sylvan Library, like those are the better places to attack, I think. Some decks like Burn can play the card Price of Progress, so they don't need Tsabo's web.
That's why we were gonna keep $100.
I made another comment that I was like, is this going to become like a 4 Leyline of the Void versus Dredge kind of thing, where it's like every deck is just going to have Leyline, and then, Dredge is just going to go away because it has Leyline. We don't actually know how powerful Tsabo's web is against the red-green oath deck. It's like, sure, they'll 2-for-1 themselves if they naturalize it, but like, what if they can afford to 2-for-1 themselves on it, or they can just start fetching up basics and mana-producing lands and like just focus on like, if your entire plan hinges on Tsabo's web, like, is their counter plan going to be able to beat that anyways?
I don't. Well, so this is theory crafting. We say it right out loud right now, but there's 2 points I would make. One, I don't think that just going down in cards to take care of a Tsabo's web is a real solution, because
you only draw 1 card per turn.
No, because if you're doing it right, you just, because you have Tsabo's web, your deck is compressed, right? Like, you're just going to draw more Tsabo's webs, right? Like, that's the.
Raises another question of how many you should have.
I think you should have all of them. But the other problem is, like, this is my problem with red green. It's always been my problem with red or green white, really more than red green. But is that it's not a fast deck unless your opponent makes it a fast deck, and because of that, you can have an overwhelming advantage, but they just have the opportunity to draw out of it because you haven't killed them yet. And if your clock is based on Treetop Village and Mishra's Factory, well, guess what? Their next Tsabo's web is going to lock you out.
Yeah.
Right.
But
and so
your range. Okay. So that was actually pretty interesting. This is my theory of the deck is actually kind of based on what you're saying. And the reason why you like it so much is because the 8 stone rains always have text. Right. And so one of the things that I talked about when we were doing the landstill debate was just like, listen, landstill is a deck with 26 lands. And the only way to find more lands is by casting these draw spells. One of them, the chief among them being Standstill. And then you're also looking for Dust Bowl or whatever. I'm like, the red green deck gets to play 28 lands, so it starts with two more lands ahead of you, and then it gets to run 8 stone rains with trades lands. So you become 36 versus 26, and like that just means that even if land still draws more lands, Sphere of Resistance is also stone rain, so it goes up to 40. It goes up.
Well,
to
it's kind of worse. It's kind of worse and kind of not worse than a stone rain, right?
At least for the function of this argument, I would just say like it's a stone rain, because it's just kind of like, okay, if all the other cards are stone rains and Dust Bowls and Wastelands, whatever. Anyways, so you're just playing 40 against 26, and the only way that 26 can be more than 26 is by casting Fact or Fiction. it's just kind of sketchy. So this is a good argument for Landseal, because obviously Landseal can't afford to play Tsabo's Web. But what playing Tsabo's Web will allow you to do is effectively fight back against this lopsidedness. So if your Dreadnought deck has 19 lands, not a good example because they'll board out the Stone Rains. But if you're like X mid-range deck that doesn't have man lands, like has fewer lands and finds a hard time competing on the axis of mana, like Tsabo's Web buys you a draw towards another land and buys a disenchant, and it Stone Rains the opponent. So it's kind of like a good way to flip the table on the land destruction plan. Now, granted, it doesn't shut off the Cast Terraform plan, so you still need to like have coverage for that, or just be doing something good.
Most every deck can beat a Cast Terraform plan, even under Sphere of Resistance. Correct, because it's very cheap to deal with the Terraform. Like 2 mana kills a Terraform. Yeah, like even in the worst circumstances.
But that's the thing, is like that's what makes the pivot so good. So for instance, one of the things I was thinking about was just like, I'm like, okay, goblins probably can play Tsabo's Web. Goblins are like the best home for it. You know, having your own Rishen and Ports aside, you can kind of restructure and play Wasteland.
No, you instead. Just become a Wasteland.
Yeah, you play Wasteland instead. But especially because goblins tries to cast this like 5 mana spell. But the thing is,
you're an Ancient Tomb guy, right? So Ancient Tomb is
a good
hyper, like Ancient Tomb, Wasteland, Tsabo's Web. And the other thing I love about Tsabo's Web is it's not as damaging to the Goblin's game plan as many of the other cards people play to supplement counter strategies. Because while it does technically decrease your concentration of goblins, it replaces itself, so it kind of undoes its own damage.
Well, and it kind of does another cool thing, which is that it's an artifact in a deck that contains no artifacts and enchantments. So most red-green players aren't going to be rolling into game 2 with artifact destruction. However, there is kind of like this other weird spot that happens, which is just kind of like, well, okay, you address the idea that you could beat manland, so you kind of did something nifty in addressing this plan that's kind of good for them to close out the game. But a couple things. One, the manlands can actually still block, so you do have to catch them. And then 2, you're still struggling against Oath of Druids and Pyroclasm and Call the Herd out of the sideboard. So that remains to be tested on my end. Like I got stomped by Fran, and like obviously he won like the turn that he won because of manlands, but he would have won, 6 turns later if all his manlands were tapped under Tsabo's Web and he just had a Call the Herd token or a Terraform, right?
So the thing that I would say is it's just like, AI testing the COVID vaccines, right? You don't actually have to have them into the field against COVID, like, because you can model these things really smartly using technology. The only argument I would make is it's not that these cards all have to knock Fran out. That is not the bar, and I also don't think that that's healthy, right? What happens is if people start respecting the deck, then the deck just becomes a mortal tier 1 deck instead of like its recent performance. But its recent performance was like largely undeserved because no one took it seriously. But you just have to take it
because some people were out on podcasts saying they didn't think that it was much better than Mono Green.
But I've always thought Mono Green was pretty good, right? Like I'm the one who thought it was good, right? Like, and you and Fran are just like, well, it's worse than green white. And I'm like, I don't know that it's worse than green white. It wins the matchup heads up. I'm pretty sure that's the only thing I've ever said. Which is
a horrible argument, by the way. We would never say just because deck X beats XY, and that means that deck X is better.
No, I mean that's the kind of thing I say all the time.
Oh,
right?
okay. That's a bad argument.
No, it's not. Split up the pot. Okay, just all things held equal. Like you have like the same deck, red deck, and one of them beats the mirror better, right? That deck has better share, right?
Yeah, if that were true, right? But because the mono green deck was much worse against goblins and burn and elves, like it was just kind of like
the mono green deck was not worse against burn. The green white deck is among the worst decks against burn ever. Super bad against burn. Right? Even Fran would.
I'm still right about this. I just can't.
End the podcast now.
I just can't.
I'm still right about this. That's been Spike Colony.
I just can't take the.
See ya.
I can't take the time to explain it to you right now because we have to keep moving. You're absolutely right. I think that in the goblins case specifically, I have a hard time imagining in some of the games that I had to play against red green, I have a hard time imagining Tsabo's Web tipping the scale simply because despite the fact that Goblins is weak to the manlands and it cuts off the manlands plan, you're still addressing so many other places that you have leaks, and you're so busy patching all these leaks that you don't have enough offense left in your deck to like.
Yeah, but it doesn't take much
to close
for Goblins to beat everybody. That's the thing. I guess you need to have naturalize /
Tranquil Domain
for the oaths, right? And then you need, but the Tsabo's Webs replace themselves. It's okay. Like, I don't know.
It's a good point. It's a good point. Like it is a good kind of sideboard card for drawing a card.
It didn't hurt me at all to play Tsabo's Web in 12-12. I literally only lost to you, right? And I look at like a deck like Tom's deck where Tsabo's Web is such a natural inclusion. If decks like this just become part of the metagame, then naturally the red-green deck will lose its S tier status.
Yeah,
it will not lose its tier 1 status. I don't think it has to. It just it's just not going to win every tournament deck, right? Like, but it's just nobody treated it like a deck you have to deal with. Or like if people just all played mono red better, right? It would lose some amount of share.
People fix their heading.
All I'm saying is they would lose some amount of share. You can't really argue with that.
For the listeners, because
use Price of Progress them out 2 times.
They killed me on game 1 in such ridiculous fashion. It was just like unbelievable. I was just I had 3 Jackal Pups. Look at
but the red-green deck often looks like it's
3 Jackal Pups. I was on the play, Mike.
But the red-green deck often looks like it's just winning by a million miles.
I don't care that I won the match. 3 Jackal Pups. No. So to bring this back down to earth, plenty people have reached out. Some burn players were like, Iron Lungs has talked about it. He's like, oh yeah, I pulled the match, and like I think there's play here, and so maybe Fran went too hard in the direction of X and O. I actually think that one thing that people like to talk about on the burn discussion is just like, I would like to trim 1 Price of Progress for 1 spell that's not Price of Progress. And I'm like, this might be part of why some burn opponents aren't beating like things. It's just like, if you have 4 Price of Progress, like, oh boy, some games you're going to draw 2. Like, it's going to rule. I understand sideboarding is more nuanced and complex than that.
Our algorithm for beating the rock, right? Like, what have we always said? Just draw any combination of 2 Price of Progress and Sulfuric Vortex, and you've got it, right? But by slicing down all these things, you just reduce the number of times that you draw 2 of those cards. And if you're taking out your Jackal Pups, which you should be doing against these Wall of Blossoms decks, right? Like, your offense is so abridged because you don't have as many Gear 1 games. You need to have haymakers to make up for that fact. And
philosophy of fire units.
So like and so people are like, oh well, I have such a good matchup because Mike has always said this is a good matchup for burn. I can cut all these cards. Well, it's a good matchup for burn because you have these tools, right? Like, can't take out of the tools and it stays good.
Yeah. I mean, we are going to be an overload podcast again though, so
well, that's not my fault.
Sorry. Yeah. It was a really fun time playing Mog Salvage for like point.
Yeah, it's not my fault.
1 week.
even Avery, I loaned him my red deck, and he's just like, oh no. I'm like, I could give you my deck just from the volleyball meetup, but he's like, no, you should give me the Mog Salvages. I'm totally down for it. I'm like, actually,
yeah. We have to issue a correction.
I'm gonna put Overload in the box, and you're gonna like it.
Yeah, right? My sideboard right now I think is 4 Overload, 4 Pop, 3 Darts, 3 Blasts, 1 Scroll.
I think I'm the one who put the scroll in originally. I think we should cut it, and the reason is it is
2 scrolls total in the 75.
It doesn't beat Growatog anymore. Like, the reason it was there was like it has wide application.
Most of our listeners don't have this guy who just like shows up to every tournament with Growatog, so they can decide based on the presence.
But it was only there because it beat Growatog.
Well, it's good against it's still good against Silver Knight. People are still cooking Silver Knight, so
whatever. I would say like I'm never going to lose. I'm like, I'm never going to lose to Silver Knight, but that's obviously the case. Like, Silver Knight is like, Jeff Ferris got easily defeated by Christine and her Silver Knights and Galena's Knight.
Yeah.
Just in case he got rid of all the Silver Knights, here's Galena's Knight.
Yeah, that's quite the solution. Anyways, quick update from the Four Seasons tournament in Italy. Andrea Mengucci has second place at the tournament. He played against Burn twice, Goblins twice, won each time, went into the finals against either Burn or Goblins, and finally was stopped with his mid-range Elves deck that contains no anger. Shout out to Mengu. He just has like a couple Masticores. He's running the Tribal Force Mage instead Kamal. He's playing 3 Priest of Titanias. He has Tinklewire. And then the rest is, 4 Call of Herds, 4 Walla Blossoms in the sideboard. So over-index to try to beat the red decks.
Transforming into a mid-range green deck. Like we said, the kind of deck that you can never beat with Grow.
Yeah, I'll never be able to beat that.
like Elf Call of the Herd, go, buddy.
If I'm brawling with Mengu with my Grotog deck, I'm going to be like boarding in 4 Engineered Plague, and he's going to have board out all the elves. I'm going to name Elephant.
You're going to name Elephant.
Yeah.
So, I sorry to laugh because I'm such a huge Mengu fan, but I said before the podcast, like at some point his luck has to run out if he's only going to play against red decks and goblins. Like I can't imagine
5 times in one tournament.
Yeah, he's a
9 rounds, 5 and 9 rounds. The majority of his rounds were against red decks with elves, and he won 4 times.
At some point, you have to run out, right? So the RCQ I won last week, I was just doing a Fearless Magical Inventory. I played 4 rounds of Swiss, and then I played all 3 rounds of the top 8. So I played 7 rounds, drew twice. I lost only 3 games. I should have only lost probably 0 games. 2 of the 3 games I lost were literally just I screwed up on the table the turn before my opponent. The turn before my opponent won, I screwed up on the table 2 out of the 3 times. And the 3rd time I was just monkey tilt mad against Pog.
Yeah.
So like and so I was just like in reality I should have gone like 14-0 which is like my record.
Well, imagine if your opponents didn't make any mistakes. What record should you have gotten?
I think my domain opponent could have beaten me if he was more aggressive.
Yeah.
But he wasn't more aggressive, and he gave me a 1-turn opening to get the 1 card I needed. I did a flashback memory deluge, got the 1 card I needed, stayed alive for a turn, and then locked in.
Yeah. So this is what I mean when I say you shouldn't practice on Arena. You shouldn't take these RCQ results because your opponents on the big stage are not going to blunder in this way.
Shout out to Rebel. So Rebel had the interesting experience this week. So she booked a coaching session with Roman, right? And I'm like, oh, can I get in on this, right? So what that ended up being was the worst of just me and Roman shouting over each other.
I can only imagine.
While Rebel made misplays. Like, I told you to do the other thing, Rebel, right? And so, in different matches, me and Roman were just shouting each other at Rebel for 2 hours. I don't think she learned anything, right? Then I get a phone call, you probably saw it too because it went to the whole Disciples chat. And I got a phone call. And she's like, I too owed him in the elimination rounds.
It all worked out in the end.
All worked out. And I'm like, oh, wow. She's triple handicapped because she was drunk. She was drunk. She came from a party to play her, qualify for the elimination rounds match. And her coaching was just me and Roman fighting for 2.5 hours. And she's like, I got them. No problem. So it's going to be a good story when she qualifies. I think she still needs 2 more wins.
Yeah. She's got to stay strong. But yeah.
Yeah, but that was a great phone call.
I forgot to mention, so the Tsabo's web evolution is going to be I kind of made the point, you can't fit it in the sideboard. And the thing that Sam was just saying was just you'll be able to fit it in the sideboard by dropping the cards that you no longer need in the sideboard for the decks that red-green pushes out of the format, which I think is...
that would have been my immediate response also, right?
But you didn't make it on the podcast. Instead, Sam sent it to me in a message.
But you didn't.
I didn't give you any room to reply.
This is bullshit.
I take all the space.
That's literally what I would have
suck up all the air. Can you imagine? Can you imagine? You get Michael J's never been in a room with somebody else who takes all of the speaking time.
So what I was saying is if Enchantress is blown out because even Rich, who just exoed the monthly, is just oh wow. If this Ponza deck is good, this Enchantress deck
maybe you don't need
not
Ray of
viable.
Revelation.
Yeah, so you don't need Ray of Revelation anymore, right? That deck's not going to be a factor, right? So all of a sudden, you have a little room.
Yeah, it's just Lanny's like Mike lets people talk. Lanny doesn't even let people talk.
All right. Last topic. You want to talk about agency?
Oh, we have to talk about agency. I needed to also talk about one card per turn. We're only at 54 minutes, Mike. We've
been on for like 2.5 hours.
This is going so great. We can't.
We had to
stop
delete
now.
the first hour.
We can't stop now. One card per turn. I'll work out. I'll like write an article about this. I have like too many thoughts. Most of the observation came from like, okay, well, one, I play all these like decks that like one for one their opponents and then just like only cast Gush or whatever. And then I think that like, you know, you look at how the red-green deck is structured. We were like talking about it last week. We're just like, this deck runs Mox Diamond for crying out loud. The only way
I think it should run 4, but I think it should run 4.
Yeah.
And all of the Busto draws are just like starting with a Mox Diamond. All
Billy's
the draws
been pushing 4.
Yep, all the draws that get out of your opponent's sideboard strategy were all based on Mox Diamonds. The second Mox Diamond really sucks in this deck a lot of the time. But the first one,
just hope you draw your first Sylvan Library before you draw your second Mox Diamond.
Yeah, but like I don't know, man. It's the deck is so weird. Like you just get completely blown out by combo decks. Like if they go first, and then you just completely blow out the combo decks. They never cast.
What combo deck? What combo deck? All the combo decks have mono non-basic lands, and they get locked under Sphere of Resistance.
At a meetup that I won, I played against Avery playing this like mono blue storm deck, and I won 2 of the 3 games.
Yeah, the mono blue storm deck. Okay, so you're right. Mono blue storm deck does not contain non-basic lands, so fair point there. However, it's not a deck. It's not a deck in the metagame.
Maybe
like I haven't played against it in such a long time.
It could probably play Tsabo's Web.
It certainly can. Draws a card.
Yeah. So, I mean, you know, if you're in the market for a Sapphire Medallion, this is also an artifact on turn 2 that gives you a mana advantage.
So Tsabo's Web is super free in Dreadnought because you don't have to play a lot of copies to find them, and because another cool thing, it shuts off Core Haven. That freaking rules.
Oh, that is very awesome. I like to call it Sports Haven. You know.
Okay. So yeah, my one card per turn thing. I'll flesh that out. Like I kind of still like. Maybe I'm just like not describing the vibe correctly. And you know, a lot of people made poignant points about like how it differs from contemporary Magic, but it's just like, you know, it feels more like chess, right? It's just like chess, you get a pawn, you win the game, right? So maybe I need to kind of figure out how to describe this and what it means to me. Because like the important thing, the reason why it's is so salient to me is just like when I think about the positions that I put my decks in, like it's the reason why I'm just like, oh, Call of Hurt just freaking rules. Because like if I have an extra 3/3, I'm just gonna win. Like that's all I need. All I need is one extra.
Yeah, so I don't even know if anybody draws 1 card a turn. Like who draws 1 card a turn? The burn deck with a Grim Lavamancer.
The red green Oath deck draws 1 card per turn.
Okay, yeah, so like, it's the outlier. But like, I think of like a Grim Lavamancer or a Cursed Scroll as being like that's a James Day tome.
That's a good way to look at it, and I think that's one way to effectively break the paradigm of 1 card per turn. It's just kind of like my thing about like 1 card per turn is like it's a law of nature, and like it's not like saying like flight implies the absence of gravity. Like flight defies gravity, right? So like Dreadnought, the fact that its only source of card advantage is the card Gush, like the fact that its only source of victory, or its typically only source of victory, is 2 for winning yourself to put a piece of material on the battlefield. Like those things fly in the face of like the natural laws of value, which is just like
yeah, but it's a combo deck. Combo decks don't run on value; they run on explosiveness.
That's right? True. So, like, that's true.
So the speed of Dreadnought creates an enormous amount of virtual card advantage because your opponent can't. Let's say your opponent has a handful of answers; they can't deploy the answers at a rate faster than your ability to kill them.
Yeah,
that's
how combo works. Yeah,
yeah. So I mean, I would just be like, okay, like if I go like first turn like Land Lotus, Dreadnought Vision Charm, for example, with a Daze and a foil.
Yeah, you won't
I
have
feel
time.
confident that I'm going to win 99% of the time. So right, like,
so I wanted to mention that you know, some would say Gush is an engine, and some say that Gush wasn't an engine.
I don't think it's an engine.
Some would say a card like Sylvan Library is an engine. Sylvan Library in the context of Green Red Oath. I'll say
I don't think that's an engine either.
I'll say there's two kind of interesting ways to look at it. One is like a pretty simple, which is like engines like Tax Rack and Survival of the Fittest with Squee, or who knows, Attunement Squee. Like these provide continued card advantage.
What a genius you must be to figure out Attunement Squee.
These people really clearly see that they're engines because they provide continued card advantage. Something like Gush or Sylvan Library, you might think that they're engines simply because they power your deck, because they push your deck forward like an engine would to a car. And under that paradigm, I totally agree. Like, you don't really have a Dreadnought deck if you don't have Gush. You don't have Grotog if you don't have Gush. And it is very evident that these Oath decks are powered by Sylvan Library. So whatever you call an engine, if you just want to just talk about card advantage, or if you want to take issue with my law of nature, which is that you only draw one card per turn, it's like a total reasonable counterpoint. It's just like, well, I can Skeletal Scrying for 4 and I've broken your paradigm.
Well, yeah. So EDT would say that Chapin got this from EDT. EDT was Chapin's kind of rabbi. Is like that there.
Is he the one who ate the hat? No.
Yep.
Oh yeah. Okay.
He's the first great Magic writer in my opinion. Rob Hahn, but then EDT is probably the first great Magic strategy writer before me. And he said that all Magic ran on what he called 2 symmetries, and the symmetries were you draw 1 card per turn and that you play 1 land per turn, and that like Weissman got it half right, but that and then Zvi fleshes out. He says like, actually more people win and lose based on the second symmetry, which is you can play 1 land per turn. Than the first symmetry. It's easy to understand the first symmetry because card advantage is kind of the first strategic principle that people understand. But then tempo, which is the one that's associated with playing 1 land per turn, is much more difficult to understand.
Playing 1 land per turn and also tapping it for mana.
Finkel famously lost a Master Series top 8 match because his Elves opponent Finkel has his Elves opponent in the Forbid Lock, right? But the Forbid Lock with like an Ophidian basically means Finkel can counter one thing at no loss of profit per turn while generating very little advantage, right? His opponent was just able to 2-spell him too many times, just playing Elves, and John lost, right? So that would be a very easy example of where somebody breaking the 1 land per turn paradigm is able to beat someone who's breaking the 1 card per turn paradigm. It's like John is literally drawing 2 cards per turn, but his opponent's ability to optimize his threats relative to available mana just overwhelms him without drawing any extra cards, right? Because he just, Forbid costs 3 mana,
Yeah, exactly. And you can't just double Forbid 1 drops and then lose all the cards. I mean, you can't even double Forbid.
You'll run out. Yeah. So Zvi's argument ultimately, when Zvi attempted to do the grand unified theory of Magic, his argument was that more games are won and lost on tempo than are won and lost on card advantage. It's just people can't recognize it very well, and like it's hard for him to even describe why that is the case. Right?
I think I actually really, if I were to the unifying theory that I'm trying to, because I do like tying tempo and card advantage together. So a few examples. One, if my deck plays a bunch of 1 and 2 mana spells and your deck plays 3 and 4 mana spells, some of which that draws cards, some of the cards that you're drawing are just to make up for the fact that you've had to play 1 or 2 extra lands, right? So if I walk up to 4 and I cast Deep Analysis, like I'm already down cards because I had to play lands 3 and 4 where you might have only had to play lands 1 and 2. The second way I feel that they're tied is like a very simple concept I think everybody can grasp. It's like sometimes you lose the game and you have cards in your hand, right?
Yeah, so I wrote a thing that I called the Grand Unified Theory of Magic, and Mark Rosewater referenced it a bunch on the Mothership.
Oh, I do like his version.
I in quotes, Taylor's version, but it's Lanny's version. And I wrote it in the official Miser's Guide, in a very detailed fashion in the official Miser's Guide, and it was just not controversial is the wrong word, just people didn't understand Magic this well, this way at this point. It was like 2011. It was just not that long ago. If you think about how long Magic theory's been going on, and I basically made the argument that what you get out of your mana is the thing that you should be counting, not just cards, but what you get out of your mana. And I made a formula, and the formula is actually, it's probably right 99% of the time, but it's just wrong often enough. It doesn't matter. So where like I was just like, well, you could gain a certain amount of life, and the amount of life that you're gaining is like functionally equivalent to winning. But like against poison, that's not true. Against decking, that's not true. But like the argument I made was just like, this is how come I won this 5K, was because I made a deck that broke this paradigm, and like for 4 mana or 7 mana or whatever, I could generate infinite value. And the Cobblade deck, which is generating a good amount of value, is like capped at like, they got like set, like I was like, this is how we would count this. Like they got like 7 units of value for 4 mana, right? I got infinity units of value for 7 mana. And then like, you know, this is how come I beat these decks. And that actually created between me and Chapin discussions of rate. Like no one ever talked about rate before then, right? So like the discussions shifted from, you know, okay, I can, you know, the Kim to Torok's 2 cards, right? Like a Stupris 2 cards, a Deep Analysis +1 card. It shifted from that to right now, everybody just talks about rate, right? That came out of Top Level Podcast, which that thing kind of came out of the official Miser's Guide. But no, I don't think anybody gets it right. That's the thing I'd ultimately say. Like we can say like, okay, what do you get out of your mana? Is this a good rate? But we can't really compare those things necessarily in a great way. Like what's better, a Greater Gargadon or a Baneslayer Angel at 5, right? Like if they never fight, like I just play one, I play one. Right?
Yeah.
Which one? Yeah. Like,
well, I mean,
like,
I don't know. It's like, it's really hard to unpack because the way the levers are connected are not so simple. So like, you know, one simple thing you can be like you're saying, like the framework is just like, okay, there's value and there's tempo. It's just kind of like, okay, well, what if we want to add in the like dying with cards in your hand? Like, what if we want to add in your life total? And then like all these different levers and how, or what we want to add in. So what you said about rate, which you know, I think is super interesting, or like trying to create a unified theory is just like, okay, what's deep analysis? Deep analysis is a 2-for-1. It's a 2-for-1 parentheses 4, right?
Unless like it's just
unless you flash it back.
Unless your opponent's playing red, right? Yeah, unless you're pinned by your own Ancient Tomb, right? Like it's super.
So it's like a 2-for-1 parentheses 4 or 2 + 3 life, and it's just like does the 3 life matter? Like this, of course, 3 life matters. You're going to take, you know, if you take damage from lands, you keep tapping.
It doesn't matter the first time, but maybe it matters a lot the third time, right? Yeah. Like, so where I eventually got to is that Magic is too complicated, and that like we try to build that framework. Yeah, like we try to create these frameworks, and the thing is, like, you can create these frameworks where they're like Newtonian physics, right? I think card advantage is Newtonian physics. Everybody can understand a Hymn to Torok or Deep Analysis is more than 1 card, right? But once you get past that, like everything is just like Einsteinian special exceptions, because like gaining a lot of life is super valuable in some games, and it doesn't mean anything in other games, right? Yeah. Like,
well, it's actually evidently valuable. I mean, this is the thing, is like, I feel like, okay, if I were to craft this with relationship to Premodern, one of the reasons why I think it's striking is just kind of like, okay, like imagine you just say like my thing about gravity. It's like, you know, in order to fly, you must defy gravity, right? Like Premodern has so much more gravity. Like the thing that you're saying about like gaining life, that's also stark contrast in Premodern, because we don't have like Uros and Omnaths and Solitudes.
But we do have Loop Junction.
No. But I'm saying like for these control decks to gain incidental life, we have a lot less, you know, even a card, like we don't even have Revitalize, right? We have Renewed Faith, but we don't have Revitalize.
I could probably find you an article from like the 2003 time period where Kai Buddha says something along the lines of Renewed Faith is so good, it is simply played in every white control deck that exists, right? Like it's not just in cycling decks, right? It's also in Wake decks. It's also blue white control. It's like, if you think about it, it's like an impulse that gains incidental life, and sometimes it's 3 cards against a burn deck.
Well,
that is awesome.
Yeah, that's all. And so I wanted to kind of close the loop on this, which is just that like one of the things that's super interesting is just that like suddenly when life gain isn't free, like it becomes super interesting that so for instance, Landstill, you know, short of playing 1 absorb or whatever, like tends to never gain life. And like if you're building a deck and you're like, I want my deck to really
my own Mishra's Factory.
Yeah. If you're looking at a deck that really wants to turn Sylvan Library or Deep Analysis into an engine, you're like, okay, I kind of want some life gain in there. And you're like looking at, like Sam mentioned on our cast when he visited, it's like Gerard's Wisdom, cards like Wandering Stream, Ivory Tower, obviously, a super compelling one.
Rich's strategy is pretty freaking good.
Oh, Words of Worship, yeah. But it's just like you're actually like working really hard. Like obviously the best one's Exalted Angel, right? Because if you have Exalted Sylvan, it's great. And then the second best one is getting your 12/12 Terravor plowed, and then you draw 3 cards off of Sylvan. But like the rest of the time, it's so hard. I'm just like, oh man, this Sylvan Library card, it's so bad. 4 life for 1 card. You can only do that 4 times, and then you're cooked. Like just to draw 4 cards, you can really only do it once sometimes. It's crazy. And then that blinded me because I was just like only thinking about value. I wasn't thinking about fractional value. I was just like, wait, this deck plays like 30 turns. Getting a Sylvan trigger 30 times, or 15 times, shuffling it 2 or 3 times in that range, like that's worth like 3 cards. It's worth like 4 cards for 0 life.
The thing I would say is that what people misevaluate with the red-green deck that was different, very fundamentally different from the green-white deck, is the amount of virtual card advantage it's generating. So like you might not be that much ahead on like cardboard material, but the fact that your opponent's hand is uncastable means that they've been mind twisted.
So you're a tempo deck that plays 25 turns.
Yeah, so it's really weird, right? But like that's also plays into the vulnerability of the deck where you're just like, okay, I mind twisted you for 7 on turn 4, right? And then you stayed mind twisted, but at some point you're not mind twisted anymore. Yeah. You're just like, here's my stuff. I'm like, wait, you were mind twisted.
Screw beats flood, yeah. And that's actually super interesting because literally it's like screw beats flood, right? And the reason screw beats flood is like once you finally draw lands, you get to unload your hand. This is like the red green deck is like a flood beats screw like deck, right? It's just like entire thing is to mana flood itself so that it can mana screw the opponent. And if your opponent's deck can overcome mana screw with like certain tools, like you can get them or whatever.
Get enough spheres.
Yeah, so it's super interesting. But I mean, and then I wanted to add the final point, which like, I was just like, man, why are people playing Sylvan Library? It's 16 life for 4 cards. I can pay 3 life for 4 cards using Deep Analysis, right? And like it's like Sylvan Library is like 2 mana, man.
Twice as much mana.
Yeah, it's like parentheses.
Actually,
3 times as much. Exactly. It's like parentheses 2. Like all of a sudden,
yeah,
like
you're losing on rate now. You spent 6 mana.
Exactly. I mean, it's so like there's so many levers, and
it's all Einsteinian special exceptions. There's no way to say which one is better. They're only better or worse in context.
Yeah.
So you have.
I mean, right now, Sylvan Library is just cooking in the context of current Premodern, right?
Well, I think that like Sylvan Library is overblown because Fran loves it so much, and Fran is
it's so clear, Mike,
right now.
Mike, it is so clear that 4 Sylvan Library is right in all these Oath decks. It's just like telling you, it's just so evident.
Take 5 minutes to play against one of the decks that has, because I have done this. You can't accuse me of not having done this one. We were in the LAN H lab. Play against one of the decks that has 4 mulches 1 time, and then tell me that the Sylvan Libraries did any.
Right, but mulch is like amazing against Sylvan Library Stone Rain, right? But
like you just cast 1 and they're like devastating.
Yeah, I understand, but I'm just saying,
why am I even
mulch beating Sylvan Library doesn't change the fact that Sylvan Library beats everything that's not mulch, right?
Yeah, but mulch also does other things in context, right? It's setting up replenish. Like
I agree that the deck is sweet, but I feel like this is not to the point of like, evaluating Sylvan Library strictly on rate. Actually misses the power of the card in these decks.
I think Sylvan Library is good. I think, like John once made the argument that the Beatles were both the best band of all time and underrated.
Yeah.
And this girl we were with, I can't even remember her name. There were so many over the years.
Relax.
Not mine. It was one of John's. All right. Come on. Have you ever seen John? He's debonair. So it was just like, how is that possible if they're rated number 1? And like they could, maybe they're rated number 1.
They should be S tier.
Yeah, like they're rated a 10 out of 10.
Like they're ranked A. It's like no,
but they're like 1,000 out of 10, right? That's like true. That's their proper rating, but like they're rated a 10 out of 10 because the scale isn't properly accommodated.
I've literally recorded like our GarageBand like silly song, like my like solo act song that I like performed in front of people was called I Only Listen to the Beatles, and I have a line in that song that says, some people think they're overrated, I think they're rated just fine.
So
This hits home for me. I had to tell John about that.
So those John's argument.
Next time we're talking about Premodern.
Both almost unanimously rated number one and underrated, right?
Yeah.
So I would just argue, I think that Sylvan Library is like functionally probably rated in the right place, but it's overrated because of like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's just like, okay, its position is correct, but its number rating is way too high because of frame. But then, like, I don't know how much that matters if its position is correct.
Yeah.
Right. Like,
that's fair. I mean, I will. I mean, we'll just see, right? I mean, I think that there's so many cool things about Sylvan. Like, one is that it starts creating value pretty quickly. Two, it's like very evidently the engine that's kind of powering this deck, and having 4 copies seems eminently correct. And I'll make sure to invite Sam Black on the cast to see if he wants to discuss the laws of nature on the cast, because it's super like. It's so funny because he was just like, I only think about engines, and I'm like, I only think about like winning because I resolved to days. Like, I'm just like, really? Days is my engine. Like, think about tempo is my only god. Like,
I think about not going to archery like every weekend. I'm like, I could just go to archery, then I just don't go most of the time.
Yeah,
that's what I think about. This past week, I think about like, oh man, this week I mostly thought about like, I didn't get enough widespread love, adoration, and attention from winning that RCQ. Like, I feel like, I mean,
it's an RCQ, Mike. Your
thousands of views, hundreds of likes and shares. I feel like I should have had 10 times the number of likes.
It's just so funny. Just Sam, like, just like, there's so many engines. He starts listing cards. He's like, Enchantress, Sylvan, Skeletal Scrying, Merfolk Looter, plus stuff, Survival, Rifts. Like, just like listening, I'm just like, I hate all of these. I hate all these cards. I don't want to play any of them.
You just don't like things, so you just put them in,
like, this doesn't count. I don't like it.
Pretty much. I'm like walking over to somebody's sandcastles, like with made by Deep Analysis, my literal favorite card advantage engine. It's like kick it. It's like, that's not an engine.
It's not an engine.
You only get to draw 1 card per turn.
This is a funny story of a similar vein. So, the week I won the PTQ with Critical Mass, a bunch of people wanted to so Steve and I played Critical Mass in this tournament. I obviously top 8'd and won, and Gerard Fabiano top 4'd the last Kamigawa Block Grand Prix with it the next week. But like, a bunch of people tried to switch into it the day that I played it, right? And so they're like, oh wait, what cards do I need? And I'm like, well, you need 4 Gnarled Mass. And they're like, Gnarled Mass, like, that's not in my playable spots.
Yeah,
like, I can't get it.
How do I get that card? Nobody has it, right? I'm like,
anybody want to draft?
I'm like, well, you need Gnarled Mass. They're like, how about, like, this is what's in my playable box. They have like Sakura Tribe Scout, and I don't think Sakura Tribe Scout is like a playable card, right? And I'm like, this is just a non-card. They're like, what's in decks? I'm like, oh, those people are idiots. Like, that was my response. But it's just like a non-card. What does it do, right? Like, it uses a spot in your deck. Like, what does Gnarled Mass do? I don't know. Wins every matchup. They're like, no, it doesn't. And then I explain them how Gnarled Mass works. Like, oh wow, no one really can beat a vanilla 3/3.
They really can't. They can't in Premodern either.
They can't in Premodern either. Like, literally, it's just like, line up the matchups. It's just like, which one does Gnarled Mass not beat? Like, and like, oh man, everybody's got 2/2s.
I mean,
like, yeah.
So do you
3/3 rules the school?
You know about scryings in old school?
No. What is that?
So old school is like, it's only the first 6. It's all the sets before Ice Age, right? And then old school, there's also scryings. So they just like decided to like add a few extra cards, or it's everything before Fallen Empires or whatever, because Fallen Empires is neither old school or Premodern. Anyway, it's the whole thing.
It sounds miserable. So,
scryings is like some extra cards that they thought would be like old school appropriate. So Phil's been trying to like think about a scryings list for Premodern. You know, the top card in my scryings list for Premodern, I actually have like 1,000 cards. Like Pithing Needle, super obvious, right? But you know the top card in my scryings list for Premodern?
What?
Serap's Packmate.
I don't know what that is.
It's 4 mana for a 3/3 ETB draw card, and you can foretell it for 2 and then cast it for 2.
So that is like very perfectly power level for Premodern.
Isn't it? I was just like,
yeah, it's just like right there. Like it's not too good.
Yeah, it's not too good. It's like just a slightly gassed Phyrexian Rager, and I just want it so bad. I'm like so ready to play 4 Saryl's Packmate.
It's like never made it in like contemporary Magic.
It's actually an all-star in it was an all-star in its limited format, and in Pauper it showed up briefly in like a Jund mid-range deck. And I just love the card. It's
have
just
you
so
seen
sweet.
the cards they play in Pauper? Yeah. I'm so happy because I was like gearing up for that
Pauper's like
1K,
Legacy.
at Pauper 1K, and then I ended up not being able to play it because I had to play in my RCQ 2K.
Well,
and then he wouldn't buy me out. That's the thing. Like I tried to get buyed out. I tried to buy him out. He just wanted to play.
Well, it's good on him. That's the fire right there. I would have
taken a buyout.
I know you would have. I'm just saying that the opponent has the fire for playing, right? We don't even have the fire in Premodern. I'm splitting them. I never split. I split the finals. I knew I was beat. I didn't know I was beat. I thought I was going to win. I won game 1.
It is a very super high leverage match for the amount.
I mean, as we found out. Anyways, these are all fine engines. So I just wanted a chance to like basically say like I just need to like flesh out the vibe a little bit more, kind of try to figure out what I'm saying. But yeah, I do have this feeling that like the 1 card per turn thing is like gravity, and if you want to fly against it, you have to work, and your opponent kind of shooting you out of the air, your opponent being able to stop you and force you to only draw 1 card per turn while they hit you with the elephant token, like. These small little advantages gained and all this stuff, like and then the same thing with tempo, like playing a land per turn, getting Stone Rain, getting Armageddon, like all these levers, like it just feels like there's far more gravity. So
that's actually a really interesting thing, right? So when you use a Rishanon port to deal with a land, right? Like you're actually -1 card advantage because you're using 2 units versus 1 unit, right? And then you're also like but you're like infringing on their like 1 land a turn symmetry, and then like a Stone Rain is like a card, and all it does is like it infringes on their 1 land a turn symmetry in like equal measure. But if they had a bad draw, like they just don't use their 1 land a turn symmetry at all, they can fall behind. It's just. Magic's just complicated.
Yeah, man. It's. I mean, the structure of the deck is like pretty simple. It's like really all in on this mana denial strategy, and it plugs the leak of mana denial, which is like, well, what if my opponent plays a Savannah lands on turn 1? Then what do I do? It's like Oath and Pyroclasm, and it's just like, oh man, now they've got nothing. Like, what if they're like every other deck that's not like Savannah Lions deck and to some extent Burn, like really can't. Like it can't naturally defeat, like even the Gush Days decks don't have like a natural disposition to defeat this deck. And then Dreadnought has some natural disposition just because a green-red deck can't answer a 12/12 that simply until they board into all Pyroblast and Naturalize and crumble.
So I had this conversation with Mano and some others at Bottle Gnomes about like land destruction's like historical place in the performance of Magic, right? And he's just like, well, it's all, and JVL, right? JVL's a Pro Tour champion. So it was great here. And I'm like, well, you don't really know that it was great. It's just like, I played Vor, and Vor was one of the top 3 decks. I'm like, we played Vor also, but you're talking about a format that was 3-on-3. Like, you don't know how it would have performed if everyone just got to play their number 1 deck instead of people. Like, there are a lot of teams just didn't play their number 1 deck. They played 3 decks that they could,
what was this, like unified?
Yeah, Team Unified. He's just like, I was the Vor guy and I always won. I'm like, yeah, but you're not playing against anybody's number 1 deck.
Was it block constructed or standard or extended?
Standard.
Okay, cool.
Right. So I was just like, we also played Vor. Our Vor player also did really well, and you don't know, right? And he's like, yeah. And then Mano was just like, what about Worlds 1999, which is Jamie Park getting in the finals with Pup Rain, right? And I'm like, I would argue that is okay, but you can't, like, it's obviously the high point of when Stone Rains and Wastelands or whatever were good, but you can't actually make the argument that they were good against Control because Control was completely unplayable. You couldn't even play 2-color decks because people had Wasteland, right? So none of the 2-color decks in any context, Control, Survival, or whatever, performed at Worlds that year, right? Like it's just like, so it looks good, kind of, but like it was just never up in a fair context. So he's like, so your macro argument is land destruction has never been good. And I'm like, land destruction has never actually proven itself to be good. There have been windows where there was a performing land destruction deck, but every single time that happened, there were like very, very specific environmental things that just are not replicable in other metagames, right? So it's hard to say.
Yeah. I mean, we'll see if Premodern has entered the era of Ponza being... well, I guess it's proven that Ponza is good. So the question is going to be, Ponza is going to be great.
Yeah, but the thing that's weird is like, all right, let's say it's too good, which I don't think that's...
It's not too
like,
I mean, probably not. Hopefully
what do you
not.
ban? Oath eventually
You
gets
ban
banned.
Oath the Druids.
Yeah, and then the deck becomes unplayable.
Yeah.
And then,
yeah.
Right, like, and
then we all go back to casting Savannah Lions.
And a bunch of other interesting strategies that were viable a minute ago are no longer playable.
Oh, man. I'm getting deja vu.
Yeah,
what's going on here?
Not great. Not great,
What's the feeling? What's the feeling that you're getting? I'm getting deja vu. First, they came for land tax, and I didn't say anything because I didn't like land tax.
You said plenty. You said plenty, by the way. You wrote like book after book of, well, we don't. You and Rich with your land tax apologist, white hooded tax people.
I just wanted there to be an engine that was good. I just wanted a good engine. You can disenchant my engine. Just let me have it.
You and Rich were on the Mano front. Like, Mano is the only one who's brave enough to admit he doesn't want his opponents to have fun. He thinks that fun is a zero sum. I have all the fun. You have none of the fun.
I've had so much fun beating Fran with Grotog and beating Rich with Grotog while they failed to succeed to trigger land tax. It's like, now I'll never know that joy ever again. Okay, we're at 125. It's time to talk about agency.
All right, agency. Sam made a comment in Not Idiots like more than a week ago, right? So I'm like, I said, maybe I'll just write something in response. I was like, actually, I think I'll write a full-fledged article around this. I think it's a really interesting topic. I workshopped it with Non-Idiots. People provided a lot of feedback, most notably Chris. I was just like blown away by the detail and value of the feedback that he gave into the article. And the current version, I think like draft 2.5 or whatever, is well over 5,000 words now.
All right.
So I don't know how much more I'm going to touch this, but I basically make the argument that agency is a thing. Everybody has some amount of it to start, and you get more agency if you can make more decisions, and you get more agency if your decisions matter, and you get less agency if you make fewer decisions, and you get less agency if your decisions don't matter, right? So, and that's just the basic framework. Sam, I think, has very reasonable arguments around like where I would say he's just like, I kind of took umbrage to like, White Weenie's like a low agency deck, but somebody has to be a low agency deck in the Matrix.
So, one is, so this, I had the same issue because when I started, so the background to how I started thinking about it, so level one, right, is just like, the Rock has agency, right? That's like level one. It's just like, yeah, what deck has agency? You're like, oh, the Rock. And it's like,
the Rock has decisions, right? So it may or may not have impact.
Yeah. Yeah. But that's exactly the thing, and Rich chimed in. So somebody was getting into Premodern. They're like, I want to play the deck with the highest agency.
You play Full English Breakfast.
Yeah, right. So Rich.
No, that is the answer, right?
Okay. Under your framework. So level one is like play the Rock or Landstill, play Rock or Blue-White Rock, right? And Rich was just like, oh, I don't feel like I have agency playing those decks. Like when I play those decks,
doesn't like this.
I feel like when I play those decks, I feel like I have no control over how the game is going to go. That's not agency. Like I feel agency when I'm playing like Burn or Parfait or Enchantress, like, decks with a narrative. And I was like, oh, well, let's unpack that. So I made kind of this Google Doc because I was just like, okay, well, here we have a conventional wisdom, like I said, level one, which is like these mid-range decks have the most agency because they have like, they play longer games, they make more decisions. Like Reed Duke gets to play a long game and then win because he's slightly more accurate. And if like you're more accurate and you don't get a chance to make those decisions, then you don't have the chance to exploit your pawn advantage, right? So like the thing that we were talking about earlier, which is just like you gain a little edge, draw one extra card on one extra turn, stick a daze, stick a gush, whatever, you win the game in Premodern. Like that's kind of like this example of like agency where you like navigated to this point where you could just get a small advantage and leverage that into a win. So people are like, oh, Reed Duke decks are high agency. But then I was like thinking about Riche. I was like, well, Riche doesn't feel like he has an agency with those decks. I'm like, oh, why doesn't he feel that? It's like, well, the Rock and Landstill aren't great decks in Premodern. They're fine decks, right? And so if you have to be like a great
more fine than the other,
if you have to be a great player to turn this mid-range deck into just a deck that's effectively as good as somebody who's like not as good of a decision maker playing like Blue White Dreadnought, then like you have agency, but like you're not actually, you don't really have agency because like you used all your decision making power to achieve the win rate of like an average size computer on Blue White Dreadnought, right? You have to be let me finish. Let me close the loop.
Agency and win rate are different.
I understand, but I'm just saying like you have to be a supercomputer to be like as good as like a human on like a good deck. So I agree with you that like agency and win rate are separate. So then I was just kind of like, I think I talked about this on the cast and I was just like, look, Peter Golgowski feels more agency playing Amulet Titan and combo decks, and Reed Duke feels more agency playing Jund. And like these are both like great players, both great at making decisions.
They feel more agency, or do they feel like? But they. So I don't know that they feel more agency. The thing that I argued was that like people tend to have more fun if they feel like they have more agency, and they feel like they tend to have less fun if they feel like they had less.
I thought that was a really good point. I'll phrase it this way. We agree on the fundamental point. I made the supercomputer comment, right? It's just like if you take two supercomputers. One is playing mid-range and one is playing beatdown. The supercomputer playing beatdown, making perfect decisions at every turn, is evidently more likely to have their game decided by variance, right? Just because of what you said, which is like, if your decisions, the game is want to last shorter than other games. So like we agree on this, right? Like that's the thing that we're saying, which is just like this deck has lower agency.
No, both of them playing against the field in the abstract, right? Not playing against each other.
No, playing against. Yeah, the field and the abstract, and the field is like also supercomputers, right?
Yeah,
like,
I agree with that statement. Yeah. Not if they're playing against each other.
Yeah.
If they're playing against each other, I don't think that the game is likely to be
right because of the dynamics. But if we just like if we control for those, like in the supercomputer metagame, beatdown super is going to have more games decided by variance, and control super is going to have more games decided by decision making. I think the point that I'm trying to make is just that like. Even the simplest deck in Magic, aside from Lost in the Woods, so like the simplest real deck in Magic, if it's White Weenie, if it's like a red Mog Flunkies deck, if it's like, if it's like an all burn deck, or it's some like, I guess that deck hasn't really existed, but like, even the simplest deck, just imagine the simplest deck. Magic is so complex, and we are so far from being supercomputers operating with perfect decision making. The difference to a person is just negligible. You're just going to be confronted with the same. Like you might have concept.
The difference in what? Win rate? I'm not sure what you're.
The difference in between whether or not you have agency with beatdown or control.
So I tell me when I can respond, because I just don't agree with this at all.
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
So like, and I chose my examples very carefully, right? So, let's talk about two decks that are not Lost in the Woods, right? A Quadrant 1 deck, and the emblematic deck I chose was a contemporary White Weenie deck. A Quadrant 3 deck, which is I chose Patrick Chapin's Pro Tour Journey to Nyx winning deck, and they're both relatively aggressive decks with a bunch of creatures, right? So a contemporary White Weenie deck that I chose, a Covert Go Blue deck, had 4 ossification, and every other card in the deck was a creature, right?
Ossification is a removal spell to the listeners who don't know.
It's a sorcery speed removal spell, okay? That deck cannot take any actions at instant speed except for one Eiganjo Seed of the Empire, and one Mishra's Foundry. It could activate a Mishra's Foundry on defense, theoretically, right?
For the people who don't know, Mishra's Foundry is just Mishra's Factory.
It's a shitty Mishra's Factory, right? That's playable in Standard right now, right? So if you just look at this deck in the abstract, right? Like, again, playing against like a blank canvas, not playing in a particular context, right? That deck has lower agency because it doesn't have it doesn't have hardly any variability in the kinds of decisions that it can make, right? Like, you could just play creatures on curve, basically.
Yeah.
Like, you can make deliberate mistakes.
So I'm sorry.
I guess if you're making deliberate mistakes, then you're going to reduce your likelihood of winning. But
so I'm sorry to interrupt here, but that's my point. Is just that, like, the difference. I'm not making an argument based on abstraction. Like, I'm not making the argument that this deck that has only permanents that you pretty much like play on curve and you attack with. Like, I'm not making the argument that the deck, in the abstract, has less agency than a mid-range or control deck in the same meta. I'm just saying that the actionable advice should not be, if you're skilled, you should play, like, if you want your decisions to matter, you should not play this deck.
I actually said you should play a deck like this under the following conditions, right? One, if you think your average opponent is better than you, you gain equity by playing a deck where you can make fewer mistakes. I firmly believe this, right? Like, I was talking to Roman about, like, I don't think I'm good enough to play blue-white at the RC, right? And Roman's just like, I'm good enough to play blue-white at the RC. And I'm like, well, I'm going to say, like, I'm better than you, but, like, I'm better than you, and I had a better win rate with your deck, and I left 2 matches on the table because there was too many permanents on my playmat. Like, that's the reason I screwed up. There were like 30 permanents on my playmat, so I just missed something, and I died on the turn where I had 15 cards.
Yeah, in my library, and that's why you like playing decks like Burn when the chips are down, because you think that you play closer to Burn supercomputer.
I play Burn at the 99th percentile.
Yeah, you think you play perfect Burn. Yeah.
Nobody plays perfectly, but I played at the 99th percentile.
Okay,
right?
so
I think you should play a deck like that if they're under 2 conditions that I thought of, and there's probably more. One of them is if you think your average opponent is better than you, right? You gain equity by taking away the opportunity of screwing up, right? That's one. And then the second thing is in like a multi-format tournament, you want to save your mental energy for like the draft rounds, right? Where you have to like make a lot of combat decisions or drafting and stuff. It's like
if you don't have shorthand for that. Yeah.
We all have a finite amount of good decisions that we can make over the course of the day. I'm like, I could save it for somewhere else where I'm weaker. And I think that, like, those are good examples. But the caveat I made after the first round of comments was, actually, agency lives on a continuum. It's like, who's the beatdown? Like, nobody's beatdown all the time. Nobody's control all the time. Nobody's this quadrant all the time. For example, if you're playing in a metagame where everybody's white weenie, then there's a ton of creature combat. If there's a ton of creature combat, then the amount of decisions you're making goes through the roof, right? Like, because actually getting guys through matters much differently than, and like defending yourself in combat matters much differently than just playing creatures on curve, right? And so, like, that shifts the position of a deck like that in terms of its agency quadrant.
I kind of agree with you on sort of like all of these theoretical and abstract and top level points. The thing that kind of gets me is like when we get down to like somebody preparing for a tournament and picking a deck, right? Because this ultimately, the reason we talk about agency is we're talking about deck selection, right? We're saying the same thing that you're saying, which is just like, I can't play this blue-white deck because it requires too much agency of me, and I'm not going to optimize with it. And I
just think about the things you say to me. You're just like, you can only perform at this level, right? And then you're going to level up one tier. And I just think, like, when were all the times that I've been successful at like the pro level, right? What was I playing? Mono red, like, I mean, my
3 for 3.
Look, I had a bunch of like Grand Prix top money finishes or whatever, but like, but my best Pro Tour performances were with black white mid range. I always laugh where like, Fran and
because
Tom
of
are like
PTGA,
yeah, they're just like literally. It'll be like, I just posted my decks from like 2005. Like, this is literally what I used to always play. And they're like, hey, we figured out Skeletal Scrying and Eternal Dragon, and I'm like, yeah. Y'all figured that out.
I mean, they did. You didn't bring the deck to Premodern first, Mike. You didn't.
So,
I haven't seen you cast a Skeletal Scrying in Premodern.
What if we took out Dark Ritual and Hypno and put it in Dragon and Skeletal Scrying?
Dude, you would have 100% put Dark Ritual in your deck if it was legal in that format. 100%. Mike and Dark Ritual, you would have just slammed that. You're like, Ritual Skeletal Scrying, get him.
I was a grinder. So so there's that, and then
Ritual Skeletal Scrying. Ritual out my Eternal Dragon.
Back in the day, we would ritual out a Sarah Angel and feel dirty because it's like, aesthetically from a Vorthos perspective, you're casting a dark ritual. What does that even mean? Like, that guy's like in a pit somewhere, like he's doing something. There's like a boiling cauldron or whatever, and then you're making a creature of pure white mana. Like,
not pure
I don't
white
know,
mana.
man. There's something wrong with this picture.
Generic has to come for someone. Oh man, and if you used an initiate of the Ebon Hand, right? The filter, is that the filter guy?
I don't know.
There's like a black filter guy that's like B for a 1/1 and then generic to make B. So you could cast Sarah Angel with only black mana. Oh wait, no, it doesn't go that way. Oh, sorry. It's not. There's a different card. There's like Blood Initiate or something from Torment Block that was like black, pay one life, make mana of any color.
I'm talking like 1995.
I know, but people are gonna love the idea of using Torment card to.
Anyway, so then I try to contrast this to like a Quadrant 3 deck, which is like I chose Patrick's deck. That deck has Fleece Mane Lion, which is like a really good. If I said Watch Wolf, that's already past the Premodern window, right? It's a 3/3 for 2 with a bunch of really good abilities because that's how contemporary Magic creatures are. Yeah. It has a bunch of good abilities at 3/3 for 2. So and so like he played that and like 3 different kinds of temple. And the block equivalent of City of Brass, right? Like, this is a difficult set of decision making before you've gotten to your third turn attack phase, right? Like,
yeah, but it's such a like, I don't know, it's like so hard to like take it to extremes in that sense because you're just like, okay, well, like I mean, there's a few things I want to like. One thing that I want to challenge, which is one thing that. Is an alternate title for the article, Why You Hate Losing to Idiots. Yeah. Pretty common story. You roll up to your LGS, you've been there, you've been around the block, you have your deck with accumulated knowledge and intuition, and you've got Wrath.
We're at Binary Soloist FNM, right?
You've got Wrath. He's got
18 Premodern.
Yeah, sure. You pull out
that is the sweetest.
You're like the control deck, and you have got so much agency, and you sit down across from this kid, and the kid goes, "Mountain Lava Spike you."
I love that kid.
And then you proceed to like lose the match, and you're just like, "Oh, lost to a kid," and you're just like, "I had like that kid had so few decisions to make, and I made so many decisions." On my way to 0 life points. It's just like, and like, this is like so relatable. Like, if somebody's like, hey, I'm new to the format, what should I play? And just like, you just hand them the burn deck, right?
Let's just riff from the blue-white intuition accumulated knowledge guy's position. He loses to a kid. What is the first thing that person probably says to themselves why they lost that match? He might say like, it's just, oh, that kid was stupid, right? But what is the thing that people almost always say?
I need to put 4 cop red on my sideboard.
No, they're like, oh, I was mana screwed.
Yeah, that's you.
That's the thing that they say. That is shorthand for I didn't feel a lot of agency.
The picture that I'm trying to paint though is that like they didn't just recognize in their head that they like can't beat Lava Spike, right? That's like the angle that I was going for. Like cuz that's such a common like the whole like losing to a beatdown deck thing. That's just like the tale as old as time in Magic, right? It's like, oh, I lost the beatdown. They had Savannah Lions and then they had 2 Kurt Apes or whatever. They had 3 Jackal Pups. I couldn't.
What an idiot!
Yeah, what an idiot! And it's just like, I don't know. Give some credit to the fact. Just give some credit to the fact that like, yes, like every deck, even the control decks, have access to free wins, right? It's just like when control was good, when Fact or Fiction was good, you didn't really have to do anything. You just picked the pile with 3 cards in it. Any 3 cards and you just won, right? So how much agency is that? That's your example of the highest agency thing. I'm like, oh, it's the lowest agency thing. No, like I'm going to split it. my opponent's going to pick the pile with 3, and they're going to win the game because they have 3 cards. It doesn't matter what they are.
Well, I mean, just in terms of like the quadrant 4 deck, I wanted to choose John Finkel's Grand Prix Boston block deck, but I can't find it. So the best proxy I use is Selden's survival deck, the Cali Nightmare from Worlds 1998, which Premodern players...
The gold border one, yeah.
Yeah, that's that deck. And so the reason I chose that deck specifically was because, I mean, it's better if it's Finkel, but again, I can't get the deck. But I chose Selden's deck because that deck was not continuous with Krovikan Horror, because Krovikan Horror was no longer in standard at that point, and it was before the printing of Squee Goblin Nabob. And because of that, the survival engine did not have any automatic routines that you could go into in order to generate card advantage. So like your actual decision and so like if you look at Feb, right? So you use like a pre-modern Feb deck, there are like very specific routines that once you memorize, you can still screw up. It's still a very complicated deck, right? But like you just go through these routines and then like you execute upon them and then you do your Feb combo. Selden's deck doesn't have that. He doesn't have Squee. He doesn't have Krovikan Horror. He has no obvious routes to getting advantage other than evaluating the cards that he remembered are in his deck, right?
Yeah.
Versus the position he has in the battlefield and how much mana he has. If he's going to get an advantage, it requires him spending 4 mana for a Cloud Chaser Eagle. Like, think about that for a second, right? Like,
no, I love it, yeah.
And he's getting a very mild advantage from that, right?
It's like a survival elves deck without anger.
Without anger, without Kamal, right? Like
without anything.
None of these things,
without Priest, without Gaia's Cradle.
And like a lot of these routes, like Necrotal or whatever, they're so expensive. And the best decks in the format at the time were like Jackal Pup Mog Flunkies. That's what Ben Rubin beat John Finkel with.
So how do you feel about, I guess, the most difficult combo deck in Pioneer, this Lotus Field deck, which is both tier 1 and decision intensive?
That deck is just, that's literally just like 3 routines that you memorize. It's actually not very complicated at all.
I mean, I don't know. People who play it seem to go deep on.
They're super. I don't want to opine too much on Pioneer. I think it's
okay. Fair enough.
Format strategically.
Yeah, I don't know.
A format where none of the common deck matchups exceeds the percentage difference of play draw seems to me like it probably isn't as strategically rich as.
I won't get too much into that. I guess I will say, like, one of the things that got me thinking about this counter argument to the idea that like some wins come easy to some decks is just like, okay, well, Simon Nielsen just like top 8'd 5 tournaments in a row, and like it seems like, what's that?
He's quite good.
Yeah, I was just like, it seems that and he picked the Boros heroic deck, which if you don't play Pioneer, is just like, it's like a beatdown deck with some spells. Sam Black, of course, brought up the Rietzel, who designed the beatdown deck of the tournament, at least designed the starting point. And I don't know. It's just like I'm with you. Like obviously, like the deck that a deck is conceivably going to be confronted with fewer decisions if its spells don't do too many things, if it doesn't play as many turns, and like whatever. Like, of course that's true, but then also like if you're trying to like get better at Magic and you're trying to like make choose a deck, like it's still important to know your limits, like know if you're not good at playing beatdown, or know if you don't have the capacity to play control, like me. But also, like, you know, it feels like you're kind of doing yourself a disservice by writing off a certain deck choice because of agency, right?
I tried really hard in my article to like people have to be in order for us to have the discussion, we have to be able to categorize things.
Yeah, that's true.
And like, I didn't want people to think it was like more agency is good, less agency is bad. So I was just like, is more erectile dysfunction good? Is more authoritarian? It's more authoritarianism good? No, it's just a thing. Everybody starts with a certain amount, but we can't have a discussion about that thing if we can't create contrast, right? Like, and so that's kind of like where I approach it. And like, I think in general, more agency is probably good, especially the better you are. but like I didn't want readers to be hung up on the idea that like you just want to maximize your agency.
Yeah.
Versus like maximizing your optionality is different than maximizing your agency. Like as an example.
What do you mean?
So maximizing your optionality is relative, right? So let's say, for sake of argument, you have two plays, and the two plays are very similar in potential expected outcome. One of them, if you have like two options, okay, let me think about this. Okay, you have opponent has a call the herd in play, and you're at 3 life, right? You have no creatures on defense, all right. But you have 2 cards in your hand, an Incinerate and a Volcanic Hammer, right? It is all things considered better to kill the Call of the Herd with the Volcanic Hammer than the Incinerate, because the Incinerate offers you some additional optionality here, right? And that is relative to casting a Volcanic Hammer. It is not an abstract concept, right? Do you see what I'm saying? Like,
I have a hard time not using agency in this description. Like I would just say like, because like you kind of said yourself, like a sorcery speed spell gives you less agency than a instant speed spell.
Okay. So, it doesn't give you more. I'm just going to spin up a continued example, right? Not a counter example, continued example where I don't think it actually gives you so much more agency, but it does give you more optionality, right? So, right now, for sake of argument, I need to destroy this Call of the Herd, or I will die because I have 3 life, right? And I could destroy it with a Volcanic Hammer, or I could destroy it with an Incinerate, or my other choice is to die, right? If I destroy it with an Incinerate, that is better than not casting either card, right? Because I won't die. But it is worse in this context than destroying it with a Volcanic Hammer. Now my opponent top decks and plays a Treetop Village, okay? I am very glad that I still have this Incinerate, but I don't really have so much more agency. I have to now use the Incinerate that I correctly optionality into my hand next turn, or I will die, right? I don't have like a massive choice here. What I had was the option to continue to play from my previous decision. That's not I kind of bristle at the idea that either of these are agency-driven plays. I had to do the thing that I had to do, or I would have lost. Now I'm going to get the chance to lose the next stack.
Yeah, I mean, you had a decision to make. It's just like the decision was extremely obvious. So
yeah, but
your hand was forced.
Yeah, but what I'm saying in these cases is that the optionality that is retained by casting the Volcanic Hammer versus the Incinerate is relative to the other decision. It's not like versus how we categorize agency in the abstract before we're saying, okay, well, in a creature combat heavy situation, this might change. That decision between the Volcanic Hammer and the Incinerate those decisions are in opposition to one another when given the option, right? One of them retains more optionality, but it's not like in the abstract one of them is better than the other. For example, right? Let's say I don't know, is there a card that just like counters instants or something?
Yeah,
like,
Dispel.
Okay, so let's say I'm playing a format where my opponent, I think my opponent might have Dispel in their deck, right? And they don't have Treetop Village, but they might have Dispel. I might, and they have no cards in this point. Like I might cast
Volcanic Hammer,
the Incinerate instead of the Volcanic Hammer to get around a future Dispel, right? Right. So there is certainly cases where the other one is a better choice. Right. So, and so I don't think your hand is necessarily forced.
I'll just have to think on this a little bit more. I think Sam Black, like highlighting some logical inconsistencies and things that I've saying made me realize that I don't fully think before I speak. like many podcasts hosts.
I think like any of these things is really, I mean, like I say in Who's the Beatdown, misassignment of roll equals game loss, right? That is just obviously not true. People screw up every day and don't lose the game. Okay. Like, that's the greatest Magic article of all time. Right?
Yeah, I mean,
it's all in caps. Right, yeah. Misassignment of roll equals game loss.
Well,
it's just not true.
Some might say the exaggeration has followed you throughout your career since that point when you were like 22 years
Magic
old.
Article of all time at this point. Like I think Timmy, Johnny, and Spike is a more pervasive article in terms of its language. I always wanted to alter the language, right? And then I think pre-release primer is probably a more important article also. So Brian David Marshall wrote pre-release primer, I think, before the Legion's pre-release. And it was released, and then more people went to the pre-release than had ever gone before. And then Watsy asked Brian to write basically the same article before every set release for like the next 10 years. So like pre-release primer, I think it had more impact on the world than Who's the Beatdown. Maybe not to our brains, but to putting butts in seats in a tournament, which is what we ultimately care about more than, you know, me patting myself on the back for being so smart at age 23. And then, you know, Timmy, Johnny, and Spike is a more influential on its language, and who's, you know, although, you know, nobody ever talked about Timmy, Johnny, and Spike during the StarCraft World Championship.
I mean, yet. I mean, all these Magic articles get adapted to every other game, right? Except for
when you say all these Magic articles, you mean Who's the Beatdown?
Fair enough. Okay, so we can try to close the loop on agency. I think.
Like, do you think agency is worth like writing about and talking about? I wrote 5,000 words on it. I've spent a lot of hours on this.
I like that the article is out there. I think it's just like the problem for me was like the end point. Like the problem for me is not like the journey. It's like the takeaway. It's like, okay, well, what did we learn at the end? It's like, well, the most important lesson for me is just like focus on getting better at Magic and making good decisions. And like, that's always going to serve you no matter what deck you're playing, no matter if it's like limited or construction, no matter what quadrant you're in, right? Because there's always like you said, nobody plays a perfect game. So like, if you're going into a tournament, you're asking yourself, it's like, oh, like I'm more likely to play perfectly with beatdown than I am with control. It's just kind of like, well, that's not your ticket. You know, it's like you'll still probably blunder like a spot in beatdown and then like, you know, miss your winning in because of that. Like don't like lawyers or people will play inferior decks because they're good at, like myself included, right? I'm like stuck. I'm like, I played Grotog so well. It's like people cannot defeat, like one of these days the buck has to stop. Like when my deck in abstract is just not as good as the other decks, like I'm gonna get punished.
The realization I've come to from playing Burn in Modern.
Exactly.
Right? Like everybody else's decks have been improving for the last 10 years. And I have all the cards in my deck, except for Inspiring Vantage, were in print when I won my first PPTQ.
Yeah, you haven't had to buy cards, and it's like that's what I told you. I was just like, Mike, the only reason you're playing this deck is because you don't own any other decks.
That's the secret. I need to buy another deck, but modern decks are so expensive.
Yeah, they're horrible, and whatever. But yeah, so that's kind of the thing. I was just kind of like, you know, like I love the agency discussion because I think it's like it's important to like figure out what it is, like figure out ways to increase it and like whatever, but like not lose sight of like the fact that like you know, if you're like, if the beatdown deck is good in the metagame and it's like the 60% win rate deck, like play the beatdown deck. Like, who cares if you can also play Jund?
That's what you're going for, right? Like, so I feel like if Reed thinks, for sake of argument, because he has so many opportunities to make decisions, that he actually gets to lever his win rate up past whatever the stare decisis win rate is for
mid-range,
Jund versus beatdown, then that might be a rational decision for him.
But he wrote an article about how it's not. Like he literally wrote an article of just like, well, this strategy works really well for me until I'm sitting across from Huey Jensen or LSV, and then all of a sudden, who cares if I'm playing perfectly? They play perfectly too. I need to be bloodthirsty. I need to take risks. So I want to be clear that article is not about agency or deck selection. That article is about specific decisions. It's about bloodthirst. But the thing is, like, you also have to be bloodthirsty in your deck choice. You have to like pick, like goblins can crater super hard. You can just like get brick walled, horrible matches with
Mark
goblins.
Herberholtz won a Pro Tour with Scab Clan Mauler. So it's about bloodthirst.
Yeah. There you go.
So I actually just wanted to bring this back. In 2007, I finally read The Art of War by Sun Tzu. And so up until 2007, I had a lot of thoughts about, at that point, I had been a professional Magic writer for 10 years or something, more than 10 years. But I read this in 2007, and that was when I basically formulated most of my macro thoughts about The Rock. Because if you read The Art of War by Sun Tzu, you will never look at The Rock the same way again. Right? Like everything he says is just like, win by overwhelming advantage. If you're not going to win by overwhelming advantage, generate the resources such that you can win by overwhelming advantage. You're just like, only dummies go in a fair fight.
We
right?
established that we're no longer a force and leverage podcast, though. We're a style podcast.
So like, it's just like, oh, you have like a slight advantage? That sounds like a good way to lose a lot of troops, right? Like, like everything he says in like every chapter is like, man, you can't play
The Rock does lose a lot of troops.
Yeah, he loses a lot of troops, right? And so I was just like, I for a long time, I mean, I prided myself is the wrong word, but I was like, I think a Reed player in like the philosophical abstract, obviously not of Reed's skill, right? But a Reed player in the philosophical abstract that like I wanted to. You wanted to win every time you sat down from your opponent and you thought you were the stronger player. You wanted to be rewarded for that differential. Yeah, but look at all the decks I played up until that point, right? I was playing like Napster. I am the first player to ever win a PTQ with the Rock, not Saul, right? Saul gave me the deck. I'm the first.
We know,
right? So like so
he wanted to rename the deck Goldberg.
He did, right? So like that was my brand, right? I'm like. I'm duress guy. I'm pernicious deed guy. My mind is constantly, oh, they think they're gonna hit their strategy. I'm gonna get them with a funeral charm, and they're not gonna know. Oh my gosh, it's a speed discard. This never happens
Mike,
to me.
I think you might have had a career if you discovered beatdown instead of mid-range first. Yeah, like I think you might have something in your trophy case if you had just done the opposite.
So like then I was
that's the lesson that we're learning. It's just like, who gives a fuck about agency? Just play beatdown.
No, it's the thing that Roman is really good at reminding me this all the time. He's just like, if you want to think about like a friend who's a mirror, right? And he's just like, you have to look in this mirror. He's just like, when Roman and I first started hanging out and before we did Ancestral Recall, he had never read any of the Magic canon. That's actually how Ancestral Recall started, right? And he said, the first thing you ever taught me was no long-term allegiances. Like the identity as a player is a weakness, right?
It's like, a leak.
It's a horrible weakness.
Force and leverage, baby.
Yeah. So it's just like whenever I'm like, oh, this is just like, this is not right. We have to remain flexible on this axis. And so that results. So in the most recent case, I was going to play blue-white in a tournament, an RCQ. Roman convinced me at the last minute to buy a black-red deck because he said it was better than blue-white. I went 0-3, did not win a game in this tournament, but Roman's deck included the card Sunken Citadel. So I owned Sunken Citadel for the tournament that I won last week, where I used the Sunken Citadel from Roman's black-red deck to work over all of my opponents with undercosted Field of Ruin and undercosted Mirrex and undercosted Restless Anchorage, none of which a pre-modern audience.
All right, so basically, Sunken Citadel is a soul land, but only for land activated abilities.
If you pick a color though, so
whatever. Field of Ruin is a wasteland that lets your opponent find a basic, and Anchorage is just a fairy conclave.
An awesome manland.
Sorry, our apologies to Rich Shea. I think we're doing a good job keeping it on the DL, even though Mike just won a standard RCQ. Yeah, I mean, no long-term allegiances, but it's just like, like one of the things that I recognized pretty quickly when I was, when I first picked up Oath Plush was I was just like, man, like I thought this deck would be easy to play. It just has like sorcery speed stuff and like whatever. And I was like I'm kind of bad. Like I feel like I can sequence a turn or a few turns. Like I know how. Like if I got 4 cards in hand, I sequence a turn. I'm like I've got 2 cards in hand. I don't know which one I'm supposed to play first or if I'm supposed to just pass. And I was like actually befuddled. And like you just go back to listening to Premodern tier list and playing with style. Everybody obviously loved the tier list, but like I think the discussion about playing with style is so interesting. And so I like the agency article. I just think it's like other stuff.
Which are the things you don't understand? You don't understand control. Like there was somebody made a list of the things you don't understand.
Yeah, I'm just like bad at everything.
Control. What else?
I'm like only good at Gush foil when it will clearly win me the game. That's the only decision I'm good at making.
You're good at Parfait.
Parfait, everyone's good at it's just Parfait's so easy. I drew 7 cards. That's the equivalent of the fact or fiction. It's just like I just picked the pile with more cards and it worked out. I don't know, man. It just keeps on working out for me.
All right. Well, I guess you're good at like having an oath in play. That bones the average opponent.
Yeah. I'm good at remembering to trigger Oath of Druids. Like I go to my upkeep, I like look at my battlefield before drawing my card, and I go, oh yeah, trigger Oath of Druids. And
I remember when we were playing and I beat you at the volleyball meetup, and I was on Black Parfait, which some people call Blue Parfait. And like I played a Plains, and you're like, why would you ever play Plains? You're so dumb. And I'm like, well, why is there Plains in the deck?
Yeah.
That's my head.
Dude,
right?
Finkel actually said the same thing. He's like, Mike always plays the wrong land. I was like, he makes a mistake turn, he plays the wrong land.
I forgot to like activate my Ivory Tower. Like I just had a scroll rack in play for like 3 turns that never tapped while I was like
dude, I feel like a genius for this. When I was playing in the Parfait days, I feel like a genius. I figured this out. When in the Parfait days, I would put all my permanents with upkeep triggers in a pile, and I would just trigger them in order.
Why did you tell me that before my RCQ?
From left to right.
Why, you're the worst friend.
I didn't know you had triggers in standard. I don't know if that standard has triggers, but just like, yeah, if you have multiple permanents on your upkeep and you're always going to trigger them a certain way, right? It's just like you should trigger tax before oath unless you need your oath to put the blessings back. And I would just tap all my cards. I'd be like, trigger tax, trigger Ivory Tower, trigger oath, and then oath blessings, and then trigger Sylvan Library or whatever. And that was like super genius stuff, and now I can't do it anymore because you guys banned land tax. Thanks very much.
I forgot in the 1 turn cycle, I forgot to attack with a Might token, attack with a Samurai, activate the Wandering Emperor, and activate Merrick's. I forgot all 4 of those things in 1 turn cycle. If I had remembered any of those 4 things, I would have won game 1 in my top 4 match.
So it is super cool to create shortcuts like this. It's also a leak because me touching permanents on the table is always a tell about what I have in my hand. Like people talk about like putting your lands in piles. I'm like the worst at like telegraphing exactly what's in my hand. Like I always just put the lands in the mana cost together.
How many goats did you sacrifice to the dealer to beat me twice in the bottles and brewery?
I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. I cast Portent. I saw 2 meddling mages, and I was like, I choose not to shuffle.
I was like, my hand is pretty good, right? Landing's like first turn box meddling mage. I'm like, oh, this is just not fair.
What do I always say? It's in the range. It's in the range.
When we played the first time, I beat the first 3 meddling mages. And I'm like, I've got this.
It was actually unreal. Like, you almost beat the 4th until you named the wrong card with your last meddling. Like it's actually so close.
I looked. We were like 30 cards in. You hadn't played a Carrion Dryad yet.
Dude, this Dreadnought deck is so powerful that even in its worst possible like position, it just like it still feels like it had a chance. Like I played against Fran on video, right? And I was like, man, that matchup. I was like, I know this is a difficult matchup, but I really want to try. I really want to just like do the thing that I did to Mike, was like beat the rock with mono blue Dreadnought. And I was like, I just like want to test my theories. I'm going to cast Flash of Insight. And like I scrapped and fought. I thought I was behind the whole way. Like Fran literally drew the Swords of Plowshares, like he drew the Aura of Silence. He drew an Aura of Silence a turn that I could beat everything except for Aura of Silence. And I was just like, holy crap, that was actually a super close match against like what would be a super bad matchup. And yeah, so this Dreadnought deck is like, crazy. I mean, I'm sure Red Green's going to end up feeling the same way. It's like, I mean, that's what I thought. I thought that Grotog versus Red Green, I would just dominate. And I just like...
I don't know why you would think that.
Because I have Gush and they have Stone Rain. Like, yeah, I have a card that draws 100 cards, and then they have cards that only go in the negatives, and I pressure their life total, so they can't even spin Sylvan.
I just remember in the Swiss, I was standing with Mano, and you
Armageddon, I know.
And lands, and like Mano's just like, oh man, this guy every time.
I should have.
He just showed me the front of his hand and the back of his hand.
Yep. I think I should have. Maybe it's.
He had Box in play too, right?
Yeah. I mean, it might just be time to go back to Winter Orb or mix Winter Orb back in, like if Armageddon's not enough. But because Winter Orb is a Tsabo's Web as well, so
it's a great solution to Stone Rain.
Yeah, excellent.
Especially in a Gush deck.
Yeah. I mean, Winter Orb's awesome. The only reason I don't like it is just like I don't want to turn on game 1 naturalize, because like they can naturalize a Mox. I'm like, I already got my value right. I already tapped it. But if they naturalize my Winter Orb, but post board, if they're spending the naturalize, it's like pretty bad for them anyways.
What about Winter Orb and Mono Blue 12/12?
Well, I cut them all so that I could make room for my wish board. So thanks.
Yeah, but
thanks,
how about we just go take those wishes and make those into main deck Tsabo's webs like Michael J would do?
I mean, that would be good. Yeah, we'll talk about Premodern for like 30 seconds. Played Goblins recently, lost to Tom. Tom was on a sick deck, which will leak in the future, but Tom hasn't leaked it, so we'll let him leak it. Michael J doesn't even know what it is. It wasn't Devourer. So I've been playing Goblins. I've been kind of 50-50 with Goblins. Like when I play it, I'm just like, man, this deck is powerful. And I probably misplayed against Tom, but Goblins is on my watch list for like either trying to build it differently or maybe downgrading it. I don't think it'd ever be tier 2 because it still holds a lot of metagame, and it just won the Euro tournament against Mengu. I played Mono Blue Dreadnought. I went 4-2. Deck was pretty cool. I tried the Cunning Wish stuff. I was super low on
Landy Ho.
I was super low on Powder Keg. I thought Powder Keg was just not it. And the Blue Cabal has normally been 4 Powder Kegs total.
Land did not play Powder Keg as I recall. I think he just played like a Boomerang and a Disrupt or something.
Yeah. He skipped Powder Keg. He had like Boomerang, Disrupt, and Null, and then he had like Wish for another Boomerang or whatever. I mean, my wish board was cool. I had Misdirection. I had the Thwart that Lane had. I tried Dominate. I didn't dominate anyone.
I mean, you lost to a Stone Rain deck with a Misdirection in your hand.
No. I lost to the Black-White deck with Misdirection.
Yeah. I think that's a Stone Rain deck. It has Vindicate.
Yeah, right. Well, the Vindicate was stuck in Fran's hand, okay? So that's not fair. Like, his hand was Vindicate or of Silence, and he's like, well, I can't Vindicate a Dreadnought. It's like, I can or a Silence, and you can't misdirect that.
But I was surprised you didn't misdirect his
Gerard's Verdict. I had profitable discards, but Fran played Black-White. Black-White is super cool. He does. Haven't finished the video. I don't know if he gets Armageddon in that. Black-White with the combination of Skeletal Scrying and the fact that it runs a bunch of its own lands and Dust Bowl and Gerard's Verdict, it's really good at competing with the sort of material advantage we were talking about. It has a lot of basic lands. So it's really good at competing with the sort of, and it has Eternal Dragon. That's the other thing. So that deck is actually like capable of having 36 to 40 effective mana source draws. So that's really good at combating green-red if you're into combating green-red. But I don't know what he lost to.
Dust Bowl and just played main deck Tsabo's web. That's what I would do.
Mike wants to cut Dust Bowl. Fran thinks that Dust Bowl is like a key part of the Eternal Dragon engine and making it extra good. He did Ponza me out with Dust Bowl a month ago when I was playing Replenish. That was embarrassing for me because I thought Replenish had an insane matchup versus his deck.
Yeah, but you know what's an insane matchup against Lanny? Fran.
Yeah. Fran is like 8-1 against me. It's unbelievable. I think it's probably 9 or 10
non-false cure camera matches.
Yeah. Check out Fran's false cure video. He misplayed a little per Phil win. Phil's like, this deck takes some tact. It's not a meme. You gotta sequence your cards right. But that's super fun. Mike, you have not played Premodern for the last week because I haven't seen you.
I'll play this week.
We'll play this week at Meetup.
I was busy winning a standard 2K.
None of our audience cares about that. In fact, we just wish you would just stop with the standard altogether. Just like, who are you trying to impress? Like all your friends are over here. Come on. Just kidding.
Why are you diminishing my accomplishment?
Oh, because
that's just like number one on the list of things that we don't do.
Okay. Congrats. You won your standard tourney. Bearded Dragon on the 23rd. We're both going to hope to be there. Apparently my car has to be the car, which is kind of,
I think I'm going to go with Asian Matt.
If Asian Matt's driving, I don't know if I've
Asian
met
Matt's
him.
taking Cam, and so I was going to go with that.
Oh, try to get a spot for me in that car, please.
Yeah, it's by the Queen's Brewery.
See, can you, whatever. Anyways, I'll try to get a car. If it's my own car, I get to have Michael J because we can podcast on the way back. But that's gonna be the 23rd, so that's in 2 weeks. Magic Online tourney on the 16th. Premodern is excellent. Thanks everybody for listening. We really, vibe with our community, and we hope everybody out in the community is vibing. And that's all we want. We just want good vibes for all. So, and as always, call us out. we're always open to feedback and open to discussing things. Maybe it won't be on like a public forum or whatever, but hopefully we can all be building bridges and all be having a good time playing the best format in Magic. Love Spy Colony.
Wait, when you say we're just into vibing and that stuff, don't you mean we were just super into winning 1Ks?
I haven't won a 1K yet, Mike, so I can't.
Oh.
I'm into trying.
Okay. Oh yeah, love
I'm
Mike.
into trying.
Love Mike too. Yeah, so love Mike. So I'm gonna go 2 for 2, is hopefully to 3 for 3 for top 4ing Bearded Dragon 1K. So
the only acceptable result is victory.
Yeah, but I split top 4 the last 2 times. So do I have to keep
no splits? You can split the finals because 400, 200 is crazy. I mean, if we're both in the top 4, like, I don't know, we got to make it a Spike Colony finals. Like, it's so hard to split the top 4. Like, split the finals.
I've split top 4 the last 2 times. All right.
Top 4 is a good split, though. It's a good split. We talked about the split last time. Love Mike, love Spike Colony.
All right, bye. I have to pee really bad, so I'm going to go.
Okay, see ya.
Bye.
Game over.